February 2022. A thick silence hung over the southern shore of Lake Pepin, about 40 miles from the town of Winona, Minnesota. The searchlight, from the Minnesota Cold Case Unit, sliced through the fog and reflected off the cracked ice, illuminating a metal object that had just been pulled from the frigid depths below. Control, this is Cold Case Team. We need forensics on scene immediately. Lieutenant Megan Crowe's voice cut through the biting wind like a knife into the winter morning stillness. What began as a routine evidence sweep had turned into something entirely different, something that could finally answer the question haunting Winona for 28 years. The recovered package contained partially mineralized human remains and a steel nameplate engraved with the words, Dr. Aaron Wells, the doctor from St. Croix Medical Center, who vanished during a January 1994 blizzard, a disappearance that left more questions than answers. For nearly 3 decades, the Wells case existed only as yellowed pages in file hash 940217. A devoted husband, a respected physician, gone after a late shift, as if swallowed by the Minnesota winter itself. An empty chair at every family holiday. A hospital office, left untouched by colleagues since the day he walked out. A bedroom his wife never dared change for years. Before we continue this shocking story, take a second to like and subscribe, so cases thought forever buried get a chance to see the light again. The discovery beneath Lake Pepin wasn't just the first real clue in the Wells disappearance. It was the domino that triggered a chain of events that would unearth secrets some people had worked nearly 3 decades to keep buried. Because when authorities identified a suspect and made an arrest in 2022, it wasn't some mysterious stranger. It wasn't a random killer. It was someone who had worked alongside Wells, someone he trusted, someone who had faced his family for years, Dr. Lillian Moore. The Wells case isn't just a mystery solved. It's proof of the perseverance of investigators who never gave up, of modern forensic advances, and of a victim's voice finally heard after 28 years of silence. It's also the story of a community torn apart. When Wells disappeared in 1994, suspicion spread through Winona like fire in cold wind. Neighbors eyed each other warily. Colleagues whispered theories. But those quiet cracks only truly shattered when the truth finally came out. What makes this case especially haunting is that the answer was hiding in plain sight all along. The prime suspect had been interviewed during the initial investigation, yet slipped through the net. For years, that person attended Wells' memorials, placed flowers on the altar, smiled at the victim's family, and concealed an unimaginable secret. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. These stories always connect us in ways no one expects. Tonight, we'll go back to the blizzard nights of 1994, follow the nearly 3-decade investigation, and uncover the stunning twist that finally brought justice to one of Minnesota's coldest cases. This is a story of loss, perseverance, deception, and justice served, late but never extinguished. Minnesota, January 1994. Winter arrived early and lingered longer than usual, blanketing the roads into Winona in white, while the Mississippi River froze into a solid sheet of ice. The small town sat in a cold valley, where every sound seemed swallowed by wind and fog. Streetlights glowed dimly in the freezing night, pedestrians' breath turned to white clouds, and car engines rumbled slowly, heavily. Downtown, the St. Croix Medical Center still had its lights on. It was the only hospital in the area able to stay fully operational through blizzard conditions. Aaron Wells, a 36-year-old therapist, was the last to leave the night shift. He finished his final patient notes, turned off his office light, and stepped into the empty hallway. Outside, wind whipped against the windows. In the corridor, he ran into Dr. Lillian Moore, a fellow neurologist. They spoke briefly about patients and a postponed consult. Only 2 snow-covered cars remained in the parking lot. Wells got into his gray Ford Taurus, started the heater, glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Lillian Moore pulled her coat tight, waved goodbye, and headed back to the main lobby. Wells' headlights cut through the heavy snow, flickering in the cold wind as they disappeared toward Route 61 out of town. That night, the blizzard intensified. Roads were paralyzed. Radio stations repeatedly broadcast travel warnings. The next morning, early shift staff noted Wells was not at the hospital. Internal calls to his home went unanswered. His family couldn't reach him either. The landline rang against the howl of wind through ice-covered windows. After several attempts, his wife, Karen Wells, called the Winona Police Department to report that her husband had left the hospital the previous night and never came home. The disappearance was officially logged on Monday morning, January 10, 1994. That morning, the Winona Police Department duty phone rang at 7:42 a.m. The shrill sound echoing through the silent room. The duty officer quickly jotted down the caller's information. Karen Wells, missing person report, husband Dr. Aaron Wells, male 36, works at St. Croix Medical Center, left work late, has not returned home. The short report was clipped and sent up to Chief Ray Keene, who had just walked in, his coat still damp with frost, boots caked in snow and mud. He skimmed it, looked up at the Winona map on the wall, then signaled a subordinate to open a new case file. In the logbook, the first line was written in blue ink, case hash 940217, missing person, Dr. Aaron Wells. Keene called in Sergeant Dana Holt, who handled the Northern Patrol Sector, and young officer Mike Torrens, on morning duty that day. The two were tasked with verifying information at St. Croix, the last place Wells was seen. From the desk, Holt phoned the hospital's admin office, requesting the sign-in/out log and any security footage from the night of January 9th. Records showed that at 23:47, a gray-silver Ford Taurus left the south parking lot, heading toward Route 61. There were no further exits after that time. Wells was the last person to leave the hospital that night. From St. Croix to the Oakdale neighborhood where he lived was just over 11 kilometers, a route nearly everyone in Winona knew by heart. But the blizzard that night had temporarily closed most roads. The State Weather Service reported gusts over 70 kilometers per h, visibility under 25 meters, temperatures down to 27 degrees Celsius. Keene took a red pencil, circled 3 key points on the map: St. Croix Medical Center, the Route 61, Highway 43 intersection, and the turnoff to Oakdale. He measured distances with a ruler, estimating a normal drive time of 12 minutes. If the car broke down on the road, the driver might not survive more than half an hour in this cold, he said quietly. Then ordered every patrol unit mobilized. Patrol cars were dispatched north along Route 61, dividing the search area by mile markers. Another team was sent to the Winona Crossing Bridge to check the possibility the car had gone into the river, even though the surface was almost completely frozen. Keene contacted the Transportation Department for specialized vehicles and thermal imaging equipment. Meanwhile, back at the station, the desk clerk logged a second call from Karen Wells, providing more details. Her husband was wearing a dark green wool coat, carrying a black briefcase, and had left work right around midnight. There was no indication he had packed luggage or taken personal documents. Keene noted this in the file and ordered checks of all accident reports, traffic incidents, and emergency calls from the past 12 hours, all negative. He called the hospital again to confirm whether Wells had left under any unusual circumstances or health issues. But night staff said he seemed perfectly normal, just tired after a long shift. At noon, Keene held a brief meeting with rescue and patrol teams. The Winona map was spread across the table, snow-blocked roads marked in red. He directed a full sweep of Route 61 from St. Croix to Oakdale, expanding the radius 2 miles toward Lake Pepin, where local snowmobiles sometimes got lost. The plan was executed that same afternoon. Teams hit the road, reporting by radio every 30 minutes, voices dry and crackling against the wind. The entire department was gripped by urgency. Keene stayed in his office, writing in the internal report, "Status urgent search. Probable cause, weather-related accident." Status, no trace found. He signed it. The wall clock read 12:15 p.m. Outside, the blizzard still raged across Winona, completely obscuring whatever path Dr. Wells had taken after leaving the hospital. Route 61 stretched under a blanket of ice, as if swallowed whole, and at that point no one could tell where his gray Ford Taurus had vanished. By that same afternoon, winds along the Mississippi Valley grew even stronger, snow so thick it nearly paralyzed traffic. As soon as worse weather was forecast, Chief Ray Keene ordered the first large-scale search phase from Winona PD headquarters. 2 tracked all-terrain vehicles and 4 snowmobiles were mobilized, along with 6 rescue personnel and 2 scent tracking dogs. The search area was divided into 3 routes: Route A along Route 61 northbound, Route B along the Oakdale hillside, Route C around the forest on the edge of Lake Pepin, where strong winds often pushed vehicles off the road. At 14:20, Route A team departed first, moving slowly, headlights piercing the blinding snow. Every patrol vehicle carried a radio and GPS unit. Those signals flickered because of wind and humidity. On the ice-covered road, fresh tracks were almost instantly erased. Still, at the third downhill section of Route 61, Sergeant Holt radioed, "Faint tire tracks spotted, about 4 meters off the center line, veering right." Keene ordered the scene preserved and sent Team C in from the lakeside. The tracks ran about 15 meters before disappearing under wind-blown snow, but signs showed the vehicle had turned down a narrow slope hidden by dense trees. The search team switched to foot travel, planting stakes every 5 meters to stay oriented. The 2 tracking dogs were given long leads and followed the wind. A faint fuel smell made Holt stop and signal the team to fan out. About 10 minutes later, a rescuer shouted into the radio, voice mixed with wind. "Metal object located under snow, 40 meters off the main route, coordinates 44°03 in, 91°38 W." Keene immediately marked the coordinates on the map and ordered all units to converge. At 15:05, they located the rear end of a gray Ford Taurus, only a corner protruding through nearly a meter of snow. The entire vehicle was buried, thick ice coating the rear window and roof. No signs of heavy impact, no fire damage. Holt had the snow cleared around the body and confirmed the driver's door was unlocked. When opened, the interior was empty. The driver's seat was in the middle position, no keys in the ignition, gear in park. The whole cabin was dry, no stains, no blood. The thermometer read just over 10 degrees Celsius inside, lower than normal, meaning the engine had been off for some time. One of the dogs sniffed around the area, then returned toward the main road without picking up any human scent trail. Keene ordered all spontaneous activity stopped, and the entire area sealed within a 200-meter radius. Rescue personnel set up warning stakes and strung reflective tape, labeling points: 1A vehicle, 1B deviation from road, 1C suspected skid area. The sun sank behind gray-white clouds, weak light making snowmobile headlights sparkle on the hardened snow. The department's technical investigation team was called in to preserve the scene for forensic examination. Holt gave a summary report. Wells' vehicle located no body, no signs of struggle, no missing property. Engine cold for hours, position 40 meters southeast of Route 61. Keene listened in silence for a few seconds, staring toward the fog-shrouded Lake Pepin. He wrote the final line in the log. Vehicle located, inoperative, position, forest edge, Lake Pepin. Scene, secured 15:45, October 1st, 1994. The order went out immediately. Hold, scene intact. Do not move vehicle. Await forensics. Wind howled through bare trees. Snow, still falling thickly over the roof of the gray Ford Taurus that had just emerged in the frozen forest, the only clue to Dr. Wells' vanishing journey in the blizzard. By 16:20 that same day, the Winona Police Department crime scene unit arrived at the sealed location. The blizzard continued blowing hard, forcing them to erect a temporary tarp canopy to protect the scene and stabilize conditions for examination. Under Chief Ray Keene's direction, Portable halogen lights were switched on, creating a circle of light covering a 30-meter radius around the car. Two forensic officers, Lieutenant Nora Fields and Technician Marvin O'Connor, began photographing the entire scene from multiple angles, numbering markers, and logging terrain conditions. Snow over 80 centimeters deep covered everything, making trace evidence difficult. Fields used a snow compression tool and determined the area around the vehicle showed no significant foot depressions beyond the search team's own prints. No separate footprints, no drag marks, no obvious foreign objects on the ice. Marvin examined the exterior paint, no scratches, no collision damage, all doors intact, locks untampered. The windshield had a thin layer of ice. Wipers stopped mid-swipe. When the driver's door was opened, they used handheld lights to scan the entire interior. Leather seats undamaged, steering wheel clean, gear and fuel gauge at half. Nothing unusual under the floor mats, except a little wind-blown snow that had slipped through the door seal. Glove box empty, no papers, no bag, no keys. The other three doors were closed and undamaged. Marvin tested the battery with a voltmeter, low charge, confirming the car had been off for over 12 hours. Chief Keene stood nearby, checking the time and ordering every measurement logged. At the rear, another technician used UV light to scan for blood or dried fluids. Negative. The trunk interior was also clean, no biological traces. Two handheld cameras recorded every detail from door handles to body panels and rear tires. As snow fell heavier, the techs remarked the perimeter with reflective tape and flagged the right front tire position, where a shallow 40 centimeters skid mark suggested sudden braking or a turn. Keene crouched, examined the snow structure, and confirmed the hardness indicated the wheels never turned afterward. The car had simply stopped there, not been pushed. He ordered precise coordinates remeasured, 42 meters southeast of Route 61 edge, 3-meter elevation difference. A rescuer used a compass, front of car facing 15 degrees west, opposite the normal direction from hospital to home. Fields added this to the report. Vehicle orientation abnormal for expected route. Checking forward of the car, they found no turnaround tire marks or footprints leaving the vehicle. The old snow ice layer was undisturbed, meaning no movement after snowfall. Keene had a tent erected to open the trunk and engine compartment. Inside, the engine showed no fire damage, wiring intact, radiator not fully frozen, meaning it had only been off one night. Marvin used an infrared thermometer, recording a 2-degree difference between engine bay and surroundings, placing shutdown between midnight and 1 a.m. A preliminary report was written on-site, vehicle mechanically undamaged, no collision signs, no suspicious evidence in interior, no blood, no struggle indicators, no separate footprints. After photography and measurements were complete, Keene ordered the car towed to Winona PD headquarters for detailed forensic examination. A flatbed tow truck arrived, carefully winched the Taurus out of the snow, and secured it under tarps. The entire site was sealed with scene secured, do not enter signs. At 18:15, the technical team finished field work. Night had fallen completely, only headlights reflecting off the icy surface. Keene wrote the final line in the report in neat, firm handwriting: Ford Taurus, plate MN4KZ711. Located undamaged, unoccupied, no clear signs of criminal activity. Vehicle seized for technical examination at investigative headquarters. He signed, closed the notebook, and watched the car being towed away. Tracks grinding slowly through deep snow, leaving two long ruts pointing out toward the white-covered road in the forest, where winter darkness was swallowing the last remaining traces of Dr. Aaron Wells. On the morning of January 11, 1994, after Dr. Aaron Wells's Ford Taurus was towed to headquarters for forensic examination, Sheriff Ray Keene moved into the next phase, taking statements from the individuals who had direct contact with the victim in the final 24 hours before he vanished. At the investigation office, Keene ordered two people summoned: Dr. Lillian Moore, a colleague in the same department at St. Croix Medical Center, and Jacob Larson, a final-year medical student from the University of Minnesota, doing his internship at the hospital. Both had been confirmed as the last people to see Wells alive on the evening of January 9th. Lillian Moore arrived at the station at 9 a.m., wearing a gray wool coat and appearing perfectly composed. She was led into the small interview room. The tape recorder was switched on, and the statement form was opened. When asked about that evening, Moore stated that her shift had ended at 10:30 p.m. But she stayed behind because Wells needed to discuss an inpatient's chart. They met briefly in the treatment wing hallway, then walked down to the parking lot together. She said, "He seemed tired. I told him he should rest." Aaron replied that he might take a few days off to visit his parents in Rochester. When Keene pressed for details, Moore insisted Wells had been completely normal. No signs of stress or conflict with anyone at the hospital. Asked whether she knew how he planned to travel, she answered, "His own car, the gray Ford Taurus." The record noted, time Wells left the parking lot approximately 23:45. Witness Dr. L. Moore, victim's condition, normal. Intended to take a few days leave. After signing the statement, Moore left the room with an expressionless face, saying only that she remained available if any further information was needed. At around 10:15 a.m., Jacob Larson was brought into the adjacent room. The 24-year-old was tall and thin, wore glasses, and looked uneasy as he sat down. Keene began with a simple question about his relationship with Wells. Larson explained that Wells was his direct supervising physician, and that they frequently worked together on neurology cases. When asked when he had last seen Wells, Larson replied, "Sunday evening, I handed in my report to Dr. Wells around 9:30 and then went back to the dorm." However, when Keene informed him that security footage showed him still on hospital grounds after 10 p.m., he appeared flustered and corrected himself, saying he had returned to the administrative office to pick up his duty logbook. Asked whether he had seen Wells again, Larson hesitated several seconds before quietly saying, "I just saw Dr. Moore walking with him in the hallway. I couldn't hear what they were talking about." When asked if Wells had mentioned leaving town or taking time off, Larson stated firmly, "Yes, he said he wanted to take a few days off, maybe get out of Winona, I think because of the weather." The police recorded the statement, but when Keene compared it with Moore's transcript, he noticed the details were almost identical. Timing, wording, even the exact phrase, "take a few days off." He stopped writing, glanced at Sergeant Holt, who was taking notes, exchanged a brief look, then asked, "Are you certain Wells said exactly that?" Larson reaffirmed it, his face tense. In the margin, Keene wrote, "Second witness statement matches first witness statement completely. Possibility they coordinated before questioning must be considered." When the interview ended, Larson signed the statement with a trembling hand and asked to leave. Keene remained in the room, staring at the two transcripts side by side, the lines practically repeating word for word. Wells said he would take a few days off. What struck him was not the content itself, but the unnatural agreement between two people who had no close relationship outside work. In his personal notebook, he wrote a brief line, "Motive for leaving town, unverified. Statements require independent corroboration." The wall clock read 11:50 a.m. Dim light from the window fell across the desk, reflecting off the yellow case folder marked #940217, the still unsolved disappearance of Dr. Aaron Wells. That same afternoon, immediately after completing the interviews with Lillian Moore and Jacob Larson, Sheriff Ray Keene summoned the digital forensics team and the field investigation unit to re-examine the entire route Dr. Aaron Wells would have taken from St. Croix Medical Center to his home. The goal was to pinpoint the exact route, timing, and any footage or witnesses that might place him on the road after leaving the hospital. According to Moore's statement, Wells left the parking lot around 23:45. Hospital security cameras recorded his gray Ford Taurus exiting the south gate at 23:47. The drive to his house along Main Route 61 should have taken about 12 minutes. Keene ordered a sweep of all private security cameras, gas stations, and traffic monitoring systems along the route between 23:30 and 0:30. The first report came from the Red River fuel station, 2.8 kilometers north of the hospital. Its old VHS security camera captured, at 23:52, the headlights of a silver-gray four-door sedan passing the outermost lane heading toward Oakdale. Though the image was blurred by snow, the body shape and taillights matched a 1992 Ford Taurus. The license plate was illegible. No further images of the vehicle appeared on cameras at Winona Crossing Mall or the small bridge into town. From this, Keene reconstructed a preliminary route: Point A, St. Croix Medical Center; Point B, Red River Fuel; Point C, Oakdale turnoff. Estimated travel time from A to C 12 minutes. Yet residential cameras in Oakdale showed no vehicles passing between 23:55 and 0:10. Thus, for approximately 17 minutes, there was no recorded trace of the Taurus. Keene marked that gap on the map in red ink. Time gap, 23:52:009. The forensics team cross-checked traffic sensors on the Winona Crossing Bridge, but confirmed no heat signature or motion consistent with a similar vehicle during that window. Night patrol units also reported no stalled or unusually parked cars. Keene acknowledged that the heavy snowstorm could have caused interference with public cameras, but he still ordered frame-by-frame re-examination of all tapes. By 5 p.m., technicians discovered one additional detail at traffic checkpoint hash 4-6 kilometers east of the hospital. A brief radar blip registered at 23:59, an unusually slow-moving metallic object that vanished from the scan area. The coordinates matched a side road leading down to the wooded shore of Lake Pepin, the same area where Wells's car would later be found. Keene drew a ruler line between points. The distance from Point B to the radar hit was 3.2 kilometers, an average 8-minute drive. He asked the engineers to recalculate. If Wells had driven at normal speed, the route was entirely plausible. The immediate loss of signal afterward indicated the vehicle had either left the roadway or been turned off within 2 minutes after midnight. The report stated clearly, last confirmed trace 23:59. Radar checkpoint hash 4. Estimated stop time 0:01. Gap duration 17 minutes without continuous tracking. Keene sat silently before the map, a tangle of blue, red, and black lines, as if staring into a snow-covered maze. He phoned Sergeant Holt and asked every gas station within a 5-mile radius whether anyone had seen a silver-gray sedan that night. Every answer was the same: nothing but wind and snow. Keene temporarily closed the file, folded the map, and drummed his fingers on the desk. 7 minutes in which a man had vanished in the freezing night, leaving no trace beyond a blurry frame at a suburban gas station. To him, that interval was not merely a data interruption. It was the final boundary between logic and something still inexplicable in the disappearance of Dr. Aaron Wells. On the morning of January 12, 1994, once the route map of Dr. Aaron Wells was finalized with a red dot marking the Lake Pepin shoreline forest, Sheriff Ray Keene ordered the search area expanded southeast. The wind was still biting and snow continued to fall lightly, but the sky was clearer than the previous day, allowing rescue teams to deploy specialized equipment. 3 units were mobilized: Winona Police, Volunteer Rescue, and State Highway Patrol. The area around Lake Pepin was divided into 4 grid squares, labeled 1A through 1D, each team responsible for sweeping roughly 500 square meters. Technicians used portable ground-penetrating radar to detect anomalies beneath the ice, while 2 tracking dogs were given long leads to scent along the westerly wind. From the spot where the Ford Taurus had been found the day before, the search radius was extended nearly 300 meters toward the lake shore. Snow reached knee-deep, and glare off the ice created a whiteout effect. Yet Keene insisted on meticulous coverage of every open strip. At approximately 10:35 a.m., Sergeant Holt spotted an object protruding from the snow about 15 meters off the trail. When the snow was cleared, they uncovered a white latex glove, its wrist section puckered, the rubber brittle from cold, with faint brownish stains inside. Holt put on fresh gloves, lifted the item with metal tongs, and sealed it in a nylon evidence bag labeled E1. Moments later, roughly 8 meters away, another rescuer shouted, "Plastic vial in the snow with printing." The team gathered and carefully brushed away ice and snow. It was a small, clear plastic vial, soiled, bearing a faded label. Midazolam, 5 milligrams per milliliter. O24B/SCMC. Holt read the information aloud and immediately radioed Keene, who was working the upper line. Hearing the code SCMC, Keene stood up abruptly. He knew it stood for St. Croix Medical Center, the pharmacy stockroom of the very hospital where Wells worked. The items were photographed in place, GPS coordinates recorded, then sealed in an insulated bag labeled E2. Keene ordered an immediate cross-check of the lot number against the hospital pharmacy. En route back, he phoned the St. Croix pharmacy manager and requested the January 1994 midazolam disbursement log. After nearly an hour, the hospital reported that Lot 24B/SCMC had been released internally on January 3, 20 vials for the neurology department, where both Dr. Wells and Dr. Moore worked. Keene noted, "Evidence matches hospital pharmacy lot. Possible direct connection to victims department." By early afternoon, the area around the finds was cordoned off for preliminary forensic examination. Forensic technician Nora Fields took close-up photos of the glove and vial locations and measured 8.3 meters between them. Continuous snowfall had obliterated footprints, leaving only faint depressions on the sloping ground. Fields stated that the exact time the items were discarded could not be determined, but given their burial depth, they had likely been there at least 24 hours. She further noted that the ground was unusually damp, possibly from temporary melting before refreezing, suggesting someone had passed through before heavy snow accumulation. Keene ordered snow samples from the surrounding area for chemical testing and plotted the coordinates on the case map, drawing a direct line to the Taurus location. The distance between the 2 points was just over 50 meters, entirely within the zone he had estimated the previous day. The realization silenced the entire team for several seconds. At 14:10, Keene called an end to the day's terrain sweep. All evidence was transported to the criminal forensics lab at headquarters. Before leaving the scene, he stood gazing at Lake Pepin as the ice slowly refroze over the disturbed snow, thin cold vapor rising like faint smoke across the gray surface. In his field notebook, he wrote a single line, "New evidence recovered, latex glove and midazolam vial, matches St. Croix lot. Direct link to victims department. Lake Pepin area confirmed as likely incident location." He closed the notebook, walked slowly back to the patrol vehicle, and looked down the snow-covered forest road, where the faint tracks of the Ford Taurus had already been erased by the wind. After the new evidence from the Lake Pepin area was secured and confirmed to match the St. Croix pharmacy lot, Sheriff Ray Keene decided to re-interview the two individuals most directly involved, Dr. Lillian Moore and intern Jacob Larson. The interrogations were conducted separately at Winona Police Headquarters under the supervision of Sergeant Holt and an internal legal advisor. Lillian Moore arrived first, maintaining the same calm demeanor as before, entering the room slowly with her coat buttoned to the neck. The recorder was started. The wall clock read 9:05 a.m. Keene placed two photographs of the evidence: the latex glove and the midazolam vial found near Wells's car, in front of her. Moore glanced at them, nodded, and said evenly, "Those are standard hospital supplies. We use them every day." When asked why a sedative appeared outside the medical facility and matched a lot from her department, Moore replied that drugs from the department stock could be borrowed by other physicians on duty. She did not track individual vials. Keene pressed further. "Did you give any quantity of medication to Wells in the days before he disappeared?" Moore answered curtly, "No, he was not my patient." The record stated, "Witness denies direct involvement with evidence. Claims use limited to treatment purposes." When questioned again about the night of January 9th, Moore stood by her original statement, Left the hospital after 23:30, spoke briefly with Wells, then parted ways. No signs of nervousness, steady eye contact. After 40 minutes the interview concluded. She signed the transcript with the note, "No additional information," and left. Keene immediately ordered Jacob Larson brought in. Larson appeared exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and trembling hands as he wiped his forehead. Keene opened his notebook and returned to the earlier question. "You said you last saw Wells at 21:30. Are you certain of the time?" Larson hesitated, then admitted it might have been later. Around 22 o'clock. When asked if he had returned to the hospital afterward, he fell silent for a moment, nodded, and said he remembered going back to administration to return his duty room key. Keene pressed, "Did you see Wells or Moore when you returned?" Larson looked down at the table and said quietly, "I saw them in the parking lot, but only for a second, then I left." Keene asked him to describe positions, which car, coat colors. Larson said, Wells was standing near his car, and Moore was wearing gray, but he couldn't recall whether they were talking because the wind was strong and snow was blowing hard. Keene returned to the earlier claim that Wells intended to take a few days off. Larson answered slowly, voice faltering. "I'm not sure he said it exactly like that. I just remember him saying he needed a few days off. Maybe I got it wrong." Keene stopped writing, looked Larson directly in the eye, and asked, "Where did you hear that, from Wells, or from someone else?" Larson bit his lip then whispered, "I think Moore mentioned it first, not Wells." The answer made Holt look up sharply. Keene quickly noted, witness revises statement, leave information possibly originated with Moore, not confirmed from Wells directly. Keene showed no reaction, simply nodded, and shifted to questions about shifts, drugs, and access to midazolam stores. Larson explained that interns had no authority to withdraw medication themselves. Every request required the attending physician's approval. When asked if Moore had ever asked him to obtain drugs for her, Larson shook his head, but his voice was weak and his eyes avoided contact. The session ended after nearly an hour. Larson left visibly shaken. Keene remained seated, comparing the two new transcripts, one coherent and denying involvement, the other changing details and contradicting earlier statements. Yet every lead still stopped at suspicion. No physical evidence tied the items directly to either person. That afternoon, Keene held a brief command meeting. The official report concluded, insufficient grounds for charges or determination of criminal conduct. Both witnesses provided largely consistent information with minor discrepancies in detail. No direct link proven between evidence and criminal act. Recommendation: suspend active investigation pending further forensic results. At the bottom, Keene added by hand, keep file open. Monitor updates within 30 days. As he closed the thick yellow folder #940217, the overhead lights reflected off its cover. The case of Dr. Aaron Wells's disappearance officially entered a phase of silence. No answers, no leads, only cold transcripts locked in the steel cabinets of the Winona Police Department. On March 4, 1994, after nearly 2 months without any new discoveries or evidence, the Winona Police Department officially completed the final summary report for missing person case #940217. The closing document was drafted under Sheriff Ray Keene's supervision and signed by the Winona County prosecutor. Based on search results, witness statements, scene analysis, and technical comparisons, the final conclusion read, disappearance of undetermined cause. Insufficient elements to establish criminal conduct or confirm death. Case classified as voluntary or accidental missing person. The wording was brief and bureaucratic, yet for everyone involved in the investigation, it represented an admission of failure. All evidence collected at the scene, the latex glove labeled E1, the midazolam vial labeled E2, plus snow samples and fibers gathered within a 10-meter radius of the vehicle, was resealed, renumbered, and transferred to the Minnesota State Evidence Repository in St. Paul. Per regulation, items without established prosecutorial value would be stored for 10 years before review for destruction or permanent archiving. Sergeant Holt personally oversaw sealing, signing the March 7th transport manifest confirming all packages were intact. Keene was present in the repository, silently watching the silver-taped cartons, each marked #940217, placed on metal shelves among hundreds of others. When the vault door closed, the metallic echo rang down the long, cold hallway. At the same time, Winona PD Central Records updated the case status: case closed, unresolved missing person. A copy of the report was sent to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension with a request to transfer the file to long-term monitoring for possible future reactivation. The case number was changed to #MNCC 199400217 and entered into the Southeast Minnesota Cold Case Catalog. In the letter to BCA, Keene wrote, "Subject is a medical professional with a clear record, no priors, no indications of flight, no evidence of suicide. Although no basis exists to conclude foul play, the file should remain open to ensure objectivity." On March 10th, the file was officially entered into the state cold case unit. The court clerk stamped the cover page in red, "Filed, unresolved, pending review." In the Winona PD filing cabinet, the yellow Wells folder was replaced with a blue one, the color reserved for cases no longer under active investigation. Keene personally wrote and affixed the new label, then slid it into the third drawer from the top, beside other long-dormant Minnesota disappearances. He stood for a moment looking at the neat row of labels, names that had faded into silence. As window light fell across the desk, Keene wrote the final line in his duty notebook. Dr. Aaron Wells case cause undetermined. Evidence sealed. File transferred to cold case status. He closed the notebook, set it atop the dusty folder, and left the records room. Outside, snow still fell lightly on the police headquarters roof, blanketing the stone steps in white. None of them knew that those closing words would lie undisturbed for nearly 3 decades. Until a new generation of investigators reopened box #MNCC 199400217. In August 2022, nearly 30 years after case file #MNCC 199400217 was classified as a cold case by the state of Minnesota. Lieutenant Megan Crowe, an investigator with the Unsolved Crimes Unit, began the periodic review phase of unresolved cases from the 1990s. This was part of the Project Resolve program launched by the Minnesota Department of Justice to apply modern biotechnology and tracing techniques to revive old unsolved cases. Among the list of more than 100 carefully selected files based on the criterion of having evidence preserved in its original condition, the name Dr. Aaron Wells, unresolved missing person Winona, 1994, quickly caught Crowe's attention. She read the short description in the summary report. Evidence includes latex gloves, a vial of midazolam, snow samples, and fabric fibers in good sealed condition, not opened for examination since 1994. This was the kind of case Crowe prioritized, no complicated media involvement, yet with a solid evidence structure suitable for new generation DNA testing and chemical analysis. She printed the entire scanned original file from the department's data archive, totaling 87 pages, and began rereading every old report. The report by Sheriff Ray Keene was clearly presented and followed protocol, but Crowe noticed an inconsistency between the conclusion of insufficient criminal elements and the list of medical origin evidence. The phrase midazolam, Lot 24B/SCMC, made her pause. As a former forensic specialist before moving to investigation, Crowe knew that a vial of sedative found at the disappearance scene of a doctor from the exact batch issued by his own department was a detail that could not be ignored. She marked that line in red pen, then reopened the 1994 St. Croix Hospital staff list attached in the appendix. The names Lillian Moore and Jacob Larson were underlined in the witness statement section. When she reached the note, Larson changed details in second statement. Leave information may have been mentioned by Moore. Crowe wrote in the margin, conflicting details, requires re-verification. After 3 hours, she completed a preliminary summary table with 7 points of concern, the most important being the evidence had never been biologically tested to modern DNA standards. The 1994 forensic report only noted no visible blood traces without mentioning attempts to detect epithelial cells or trace proteins, techniques that did not exist at the time. Crowe submitted a proposal to Cold Case Unit Director Colonel Harris Dunn, requesting permission to review and unseal the evidence batch stored at the St. Paul warehouse. In the proposal, she wrote, "The Wells case has a strong file structure, intact evidence, clear administrative origin," requesting unsealing to conduct DNA testing using differential frequency procedures and pharmaceutical spectrometry analysis. Dunn approved the file the same day and required an additional court order from Ramsey County to legalize the warehouse access process. On August 12, 2022, Lieutenant Crowe appeared before Judge Alfred Keating at Ramsey County District Court, citing Section 103.7 of the Minnesota Investigation Code, allowing re-examination of sealed evidence when new technical capabilities could produce definitive identification or subject linkage results. The hearing was brief, attended only by her and the state prosecutor representative. Keating signed Order #22481M, authorizing the unsealing of evidence in case MNCC 19940-217 under Cold Case Unit supervision. The order was electronically transmitted to St. Paul headquarters at 1547 the same day. Crowe printed it, signed for receipt, then sent an internal notice to Chief Technician Will Haney to prepare the examination room. At that point, a file that had seemed to sleep peacefully for nearly 3 decades was officially returned to the active investigation process. As the office lights gradually went out that evening, Crowe remained at her computer screen, looking again at the black and white photo of the 1994 crime scene. A snow-covered Ford Taurus flashlight beams reflecting off the frozen surface of Lake Pepin. Beneath the image, the faded caption was still legible. Scene secured. January 12, 1994. She paused the cursor there, then typed the final line in her electronic duty log, Cold Case MNCC 19940-217, request to reopen. Approved. Begin physical evidence retrieval. On the morning of August 16, 2022, immediately after receiving the unsealing order from Ramsey County Court, Lieutenant Megan Crowe and Chief Technician Will Haney personally arrived at the St. Paul Evidence Storage Facility to carry out the retrieval procedure. The preservation room was located on sub-basement level 2 of the State Justice Center, maintained at a steady 10 degrees Celsius, with dim lighting and a faint smell of metal mixed with preservation chemicals in the air. Evidence box MNCC 19940-217 was removed from shelf B42, its exterior still bearing the intact silver seal with the faded signature of Sergeant Holt from 3 decades earlier. Under the supervision of an independent monitor, Crowe cut the sealing tape, opened the lid, and logged each item one by one. Inside were 4 marked nylon bags, E1, E2, E3, E4. Additionally, in a small side compartment was a Maxell 90-minute cassette tape, not listed in the original evidence inventory. Haney checked the label and confirmed it was a supplemental item collected in 1994 that may have been misfiled during warehouse relocation. Everything was photographed, relabeled with new seals, and transferred to the Central Forensic Laboratory in St. Paul for modern technological testing. In the initial phase, the forensic team focused on 2 primary items, the collar fabric fragment and the drug vial. The fabric sample was processed for trace DNA extraction under the supervision of Dr. Marianne Lutz. Under the electron microscope, microscopic epithelial cells were detected adhered to the collar folds, not belonging to the original owner. Comparison with referenced DNA samples from the 1994 St. Croix Hospital archives showed the recovered DNA did not match Dr. Aaron Wells, but did match the biological profile of intern Jacob Larson, who had been questioned in the original case. The forensic report was printed with 99.86% certainty. Crowe carefully read every line, then signed the record. DNA discovery belonging to Jacob Larson on collar. Meanwhile, Haney conducted chemical fingerprint analysis on the midazolam vial. After 48 hours, the system revealed 3 usable prints. 2 were insufficiently distinct, but the third was high clarity and suitable for direct database comparison. The result returned a perfect match to the fingerprint record of Dr. Lillian Moore, who had worked in the St. Croix Neurology Department and was the last person known to have seen Wells before his disappearance. Moore's print was located midway along the vial body, suggesting she had directly handled the object before it was discarded at the scene. Crowe noted the result in the interim report, E2, fingerprint positively identified as L. Moore, 100% probability. The 2 consecutive findings on the same day left the entire lab silent for several minutes. After 3 decades, inanimate evidence had for the first time directly linked to the 2 main figures in the old file. Yet Crowe remained calm and ordered continued testing of the remaining items, including the cassette tape of unknown content. Haney transferred the tape to the Digital Audio Restoration Department, handled by engineer Nora Finch. The tape showed light oxidation and edge scratches, but the magnetic core was intact. Finch performed a cleaning process with isopropanol solution, then ran it on a Revox B77 playback machine connected to noise reduction software. That afternoon, the first 45 minutes were converted into a digital audio file. Initial playback revealed only steady background noise mixed with microphone hiss and wind. At minute 38, a faint segment of human speech appeared, muffled and unclear. Finch applied spectral frequency filtering to separate the voices from the background, revealing 2 distinct voices, one male, one female, recorded at a distance from the microphone. Identification was not yet possible, but the female voice was noted to have timbre characteristics similar to the voice sample of Moore from the 1994 interview recordings. The male voice was too noisy for conclusive analysis. Finch noted, Maxell 90 tape captures dialogue between 2 individuals, likely in an enclosed space. Audio includes mechanical vibration, presumed automobile environment. Crowe requested full backup of the audio file and advancement to the next phase of digital enhancement to clarify the spoken content. Before leaving the lab that night, she stood at the workbench, staring at the freshly printed report. A short line at the bottom of the page read, "First traceable biological evidence linked to both witnesses." 30 years later, the Dr. Aaron Wells case finally had evidence that could speak. Traces that time could not erase, opening the possibility that the 1994 disappearance was no longer merely a random vanishing. On August 18, 2022, 2 days after completing the DNA and fingerprint examinations, Lieutenant Megan Crowe officially transferred the cassette tape restoration to the Cold Case Unit's Specialized Audio Forensics Division. Under the supervision of engineer Nora Finch and forensic audio specialist Michael Laird, the recording was re-encoded in 24-bit wave format to preserve the original frequency range. Processing began with low-frequency noise, filtering below 60 Hz, distortion removal, and reconstruction of audio segments broken by heavy interference. For the first 15 minutes, the recording contained only ambient noise and metallic vibration, resembling an idling engine inside a confined space, possibly a vehicle interior. At minute 19, the first female voice appeared, speaking softly with a slightly hoarse quality and irregular breathing. "No one will know, just listen to me." The male voice responded briefly, low and urgent, words unclear, "I don't want to be involved in this anymore." Finch boosted the frequency spectrum and isolated a roughly 4-minute dialogue segment. Afterward, strong wind rushed through the microphone mixed with sounds of hard objects colliding. Spectral analysis showed frequencies consistent with metal-on-glass impacts, possibly someone striking the car door. From minute 25 to 32, the voices grew tense. The female voice rose in pitch and speed, breathless and halting. She spoke more clearly. "You promised you would help me. You can't back out now." The male voice replied, "I only said I would talk to him, not before being cut off by a loud impact, followed by 11 seconds of silence. Finch paused, rewound, and listened multiple times, then noted, heavy impact sound, 1.2 kHz peak, estimated object weight 2.3 kilograms dropped or struck against hard surface near microphone, likely inside vehicle, near driver's seat. After the silence, the female voice returned, lower and trembling. If you won't do it, I'll do it myself. The male voice did not respond. At timestamp 32:14, the sound of a door latch releasing and stronger wind indicated the car door had opened. Finch carefully advanced frame by frame, marking 12 significant audio events, including 4 dialogue segments and 8 physical sounds. Crowe stood behind her, silently observing the entire process. When Finch reached minute 38, the tape's final portion, the female voice delivered an almost completely clear sentence. "He doesn't deserve to survive." Immediately afterward, the tape ended with a burst of hiss. No further data existed after minute 39. The technical team decided to export the entire restored audio for voice comparison. Laird used Isotope RX forensic voice identification software and timbre matching algorithms against the cold case archive database. The female voice sample was compared to Lillian Moore's 2 1994 interview recordings. Analysis of 27 acoustic parameters, including fundamental pitch, formant frequencies, and breathing patterns, yielded a 98.3% match. The technical report concluded, female voice on tape matches Lillian Moore's voice sample with near absolute certainty. Crowe requested cross-verification with the independent voice grid software. Results confirmed 97.8% similarity within acceptable error margins. Thus, it could be affirmed that the female voice on the tape belonged to Moore. The male voice was isolated separately. The signal was weak and mixed with high-frequency noise. Finch applied inverse spectrum noise reduction, recovering clearer phonemes. Don't, dangerous, enough. Although identity could not yet be confirmed, the frequency spectrum and pitch variation were consistent with Dr. Aaron Wells's voice from a 1993 internal hospital media interview. Both voices alternated, confirming a real-time exchange between two people in a confined space, most likely inside Wells's car, matching Finch's initial environmental assessment. To strengthen the evidence, Laird generated time-frequency distribution maps and waveform charts showing sudden intensity spikes during argument segments, particularly at minutes 25 and 31, with impact frequencies of 1.2, 1.4 kHz, corresponding to forceful non-accidental blows. Crowe ordered all data compiled into an official audio forensic report. The report concluded, audio file recovered from Maxell 90 cassette records, dialogue between two individuals, female voice positively identified as Lillian Moore. Male voice highly probable as Dr. Aaron Wells. The recording contains heavy impact sounds, arguing and statements indicating conflict. Frequency analysis indicates recording in an enclosed space, most likely inside an automobile. When Finch removed her headphones, the room fell silent except for the soft hum of cooling fans. Crowe sat down and wrote a few lines in her notebook. For the first time since 1994, Wells has a voice in the file again. She ordered 3 backup copies of the audio file. One sent to secure storage, one kept in the cold case unit electronic archive, and one printed spectrogram of key frames submitted to the state prosecutor's office. Before leaving the room, Crowe paused at the glass wall overlooking the long corridor of the St. Paul Forensic Center, where hundreds of cases had once been opened and closed. The man's urgent, panicked voice and the woman's cold, low tone still echoed in her mind. He doesn't deserve to survive. One sentence, 12 syllables, drifting through nearly 30 years, now resounded like living evidence in the cold metal room, and Crowe understood that from that moment. Dr. Aaron Wells's disappearance had crossed the boundary of an ordinary missing person file. On the morning of August 20, 2022, after the audio forensic report was finalized and voice confirmation between Wells and Moore established, Lieutenant Megan Crowe began reconstructing the detailed timeline of the night of January 9, 1994. The night Dr. Aaron Wells disappeared. She retrieved all original data from the Winona police file, including the St. Croix Hospital duty logs, Route 61 maps, and internal call records preserved in the hospital's old switchboard system, then entered everything into the Integrated Case Map X Analysis System, a tool designed for investigative timeline reconstruction. On the large conference room screen, Crowe displayed the original timeline, 21 o'clock, Wells finished consultations, 23:47. His car exited the hospital gate. 23:52. Recorded passing Red River fuel station camera. 23:59. Traffic radar detected metal signature matching a Ford Taurus 001. Signal lost completely. The 17-minute gap between 23:52 and 009 had been the blind spot that stalled the 1994 investigation. This time, Crowe aimed to align every marker with independent sources. She requested the hospital archives to resupply the January 9th night shift duty logs. The data, recovered from microfilm and faded but legible, showed line 214, an internal call placed from the neurology department extension 245 to the ground floor administrative office. At 23:49, lasting 1 minute 32 seconds, the call was logged as initiated by Moore. The recipient was marked only as admin shift, no name recorded. This coincided precisely with the time frame of Wells leaving the hospital premises on camera at 23:47. Crowe highlighted that time block in red on the screen, noting, "Call from Moore occurred while Wells was still on premises or had just left." When cross-referenced with the facility map, the distance between the parking lot and the admin office was less than a 2-minute walk. Crowe hypothesized the call might relate to Wells's departure, possibly Moore contacting another staff member to report or confirm something immediately after he left. For verification, she requested analysis of Wells's home landline records from Midwest Line Telecommunications, data overlooked in the original investigation, because no calls were logged after 21 o'clock. However, deeper archival backups revealed an incoming call at 008, exactly 7 minutes after Wells's car vanished from radar. The call lasted 22 seconds and originated from local number 507-2947, matching the hospital's registered prefix. The timing aligned almost perfectly with the vehicle's disappearance window. Crowe zoomed in on the electronic map, connecting 3 points: Red River fuel camera, radar checkpoint #4, and the 008 call. A red zigzag line appeared, covering exactly 6.4 kilometers along Route 61 toward Lake Pepin, matching the later evidence discovery location. When the restored audio timeline was overlaid, Finch determined the recorded conversation began around 23:55 and ended near 039, based on tape length and distinctive engine sounds characteristic of the downhill section near the lake. This placed the Wells-Moore argument inside the signal loss window. Crowe boxed those 17 minutes in red with the label Primary Window, Interaction Wells-Moore. Next, she reviewed the hospital security log. The night guard's report noted, Dr. Moore returned to the office area at 0:45 to retrieve patient files. A minor but unusual detail since administrative areas were closed at that hour. Comparing 0:45 with the 23:49 internal call revealed a 56-minute gap in Moore's whereabouts with no alibi, perfectly overlapping the end of the taped argument. Crowe wrote in the minutes, Moore has no clear alibi from 23:50 to 0:45. This time frame coincides with the taped dialogue and Wells's signal loss. To solidify the chain of events, Crowe used GIS software to calculate travel distance between the hospital and the tourist discovery site, factoring average speed under 1994, snow and nighttime visibility conditions. Results ranged 12-15 minutes, matching perfectly the interval from Wells leaving the hospital to disappearance. She pinned a detailed timeline diagram to the cold case office wall, 2347. Wells leaves hospital. 2349. More places unexplained internal coal. 2352. Wells passes Red River fuel. 2359. Radar registers torus-like object. 001. Signal lost completely. 008. Call from hospital number to Wells's home phone lasts 22 seconds. Unanswered. 045. More returns to hospital. The entire sequence was connected by lines forming a single closed loop in the file. As the office lights dimmed, Crowe stared at the whiteboard covered with arrows and timestamps. In the center was the line she had just written in red marker. Wells disappeared within a 17-minute window. Moore is the only person with contact during that exact time frame. No one else could fill that void, except the two people who had appeared together on a tape buried for nearly 30 years. On August 24, 2022, after completing the reconstruction of the timeline and determining that Lake Pepin was the final point in Dr. Aaron Wells's journey, Lieutenant Megan Crowe signed the order to deploy an expanded topographic survey along the eastern shoreline of the lake, the area where the Ford Taurus and evidence had been discovered in 1994. The Minnesota State Crime Lab, in coordination with the Geophysics Unit from Winona University, brought in a 3D 2000R ground-penetrating radar (GPR) unit specifically designed for forensic surveys. The selected zone was approximately 70 meters from Route 61, stretching 200 meters along the forest edge where the terrain was low, consisting of clay mixed with mud that easily trapped foreign objects beneath the moist soil layer. That morning, thick fog blanketed the lake's surface. The air was cold and so quiet that every footstep sinking into the mud echoed clearly. Crowe and geophysicist Dr. Evan Marks personally operated the scanner, setting it to a 400 MHz frequency band with a survey depth of 3 meters. The GPR screen displayed steady parallel waveforms until the unit reached coordinates N44°29, 52 inches, W92°0713, where an anomalous object appeared, an oval-shaped mass approximately 1.6 meters long, buried 0.9 meters below the surface, exhibiting a reflection profile characteristic of decomposed organic structure, surrounded by a weak reflective layer resembling fabric fibers. Marks halted the machine, pinpointed the location, and marked it with a metal stake. The radar data was printed on-site, revealing a distinctive orange response zone, only produced by soft objects containing phosphate minerals, typically human bone. Crowe immediately ordered a 10-meter radius cordon around the anomaly, erected tarps for cover, and deployed the forensic excavation team. Excavation began at 13:15 under the supervision of Chief Forensic Examiner Nora Fields. The surface layer consisted of wet mud and decayed roots that collapsed easily, so each shovel cut was performed with extreme caution. After nearly an hour, when the soil at nearly 1 meter depth had been removed, a piece of off-white fabric began to emerge. Fields paused, gently brushing away adhering dirt with a soft brush. The dull white of the fabric gradually became clear. It was thick cotton, the kind used for medical lab coats. Crowe stepped forward, leaned in, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "Stop digging deeper, photograph, and mark it." The forensic camera captured continuous shots from all 4 angles. When the fabric was fully uncovered, human bones were revealed beneath the soil, part of the left forearm, and a partially exposed skull. The lab coat was wrapped around the upper torso, fused to the bones by soil and decayed fibers. A small section on the chest still bore a faded logo, St. Croix Medical Center. On the chest was a rusted metal nameplate, the engraved letters faint but legible, A. Wells. For several minutes, no one spoke. A light breeze blew across the lake, rattling the tarps, and Crowe understood they had found what everyone had believed impossible for nearly 30 years. The remains were processed according to standard forensic protocol. Each bone segment was stabilized with cloth tape, numbered, and placed in separate preservation bags. The lab coat fabric was left intact for DNA testing and adhesion analysis. Everything was transported to the State Forensic Laboratory in St. Paul that same night. There, human bone specialist Dr. Richard Hale conducted anthropological measurements, skull structure, dental wear, and femur length, all matched the biological profile of Dr. Wells from hospital records. For absolute confirmation, DNA samples were taken from the femur and dental pulp and compared against samples from next of kin, his wife Karen Wells, now living in Duluth. The comparison samples were sent to the National DNA Center for 21 locus STR analysis. Results returned on the afternoon of August 27, 2022, showing 99.9997% genetic match, confirming that the remains excavated at Lake Pepin were indeed those of Dr. Aaron Wells, missing since January 1994. The final report was printed and forwarded to the state prosecutor. The last line in bold, positive identification. Subject Dr. Aaron Wells. Status: deceased. Estimated time of death: January 9, 1994. Crowe received the report at 1812, slowly folded it, and set it on the desk. On Lake Pepin, the late-day sun reflected through thin mist, casting pale golden light across the calm water that had remained absolutely silent for 30 years. The missing person case finally had an answer, but for Crowe, this was only the starting point of a much larger question: what really happened during the 17 minutes between Wells's car leaving the hospital and his signal vanishing forever in that night's blizzard. On August 28, 2022, one day after the DNA results confirmed the victim's identity, Lieutenant Megan Crowe was present at the Minnesota State Medical Examiner's office to witness the official forensic autopsy, led by Dr. Richard Hale. Dr. Aaron Wells's remains were stored in cold chamber number 3. The bones had been mechanically cleaned and reassembled on a stainless steel table. Although only skeletonized with some adipocere tissue remaining, preservation in the moist lakeside clay had kept many samples viable for testing. Dr. Hale and his technicians performed full-body X-rays, then analyzed the skull and rib structures. Initial findings revealed a 6.3 centimeters linear fracture on the left occipital region, with sharp, inwardly depressed edges, indicating forceful impact from a rounded blunt object, most likely a steering wheel or metal-edged item. No corresponding fractures appeared on other bones, confirming the impact was focused and not caused by earth collapse. Hale ordered bone dust samples from the fracture site to test for foreign metallic traces. Subsequent spectral analysis detected trace iron and chromium, components characteristic of the steering wheel alloy in early 1990s Ford vehicles, matching the Taurus model Wells drove. While Hale examined the skull, the biochemistry team led by Dr. Olivia Rhodes tested adipocere from the neck and left forearm. Under spectroscopic microscopy, the forearm skin retained a small circular indentation, 1.2 mm in diameter, surrounded by faint discoloration. Rhodes scanned the area with mass spectrometry and detected residual benzodiazepine, specifically midazolam, the same drug found in syringe E2 at the scene. Extracted concentration was approximately 0.8 micrograms per gram of tissue, equivalent to a sedative or light anesthetic dose. The injection site showed no inflammatory response, indicating administration very close to the time of death, before circulation ceased. Hale noted in the record, injection mark, left forearm, consistent with hypodermic needle, likely administered pre-mortem. Next, femoral bone marrow was sampled for residual chemistry. LCMS results revealed, in addition to midazolam, trace ethanol, and low norepinephrine metabolites, signs of central nervous system depression prior to death. Taken together, the findings indicated the victim had been lightly sedated with a tranquilizer, then suffered a severe blow to the occiput, causing instant or near-instant death. There were no defensive fractures or lower limb abrasions, indicating Wells did not resist and was likely unconscious at the time of impact. Hale further examined the cervical spine and vertebrae to rule out natural fall. The spine was intact with no torsional fractures, eliminating the possibility of falling from a standing position. He added, "No accidental fall indicators. Injury pattern, consistent with blunt force trauma delivered to posterior cranium." Residual hair inside the lab coat was analyzed via infrared spectroscopy, revealing partially denatured proteins, possibly from low-temperature chemical decomposition, with no evidence of burning. When all data were compiled, the forensic team reconstructed the biological sequence of death. On the night of January 9, 1994, Wells was likely injected with a sedative dose of midazolam, causing reduced consciousness, after which his head was struck by a hard object, producing an occipital skull fracture and acute cerebral hemorrhage, resulting in death within minutes. Soil analysis around the skull detected phosphate deposits from brain tissue, confirming the injury occurred before burial. Hale signed the final autopsy report. Cause of death: combined effect of acute midazolam intoxication and blunt force trauma to the skull. Manner of death: homicide. Lieutenant Crowe read the conclusion, then requested copies of all X-rays and chemical charts as evidence for the state prosecutor. As she looked at the final X-ray, the clean fracture line running from the rear of the skull to the occipital base was clearly visible, alongside a tiny adhered metal fragment, silent proof of an unnatural death. Hale removed his gloves, cleaned his glasses, and said softly, almost as a note to himself, "The injection and the impact were less than 10 minutes apart." The words echoed in the cold room amid the steady hum of the ventilation system. Crowe stood silently, adding a final line to her own report. Time of death confirmed: night of September 1, 1994. Cause: sedative overdose and cranial trauma. Conclusion: homicide. When the surgical lights went out, only the smell of formalin and the cold wind slipping through the door cracks remained, as if the past 30 years were being peeled back layer by layer from the very body that had lain buried through that winter. On August 31, 2022, 3 days after the autopsy report was released, Lieutenant Megan Crowe convened an emergency meeting with the cold case unit investigators at the St. Paul headquarters to plan the next phase, locating individuals directly linked to the biological evidence. On the large screen were 2 enlarged files: Jacob Larson and Lillian Moore. Red text at the top displayed the forensic results: Larson's DNA on the victim's lab coat collar, Moore's fingerprints on the midazolam vial, and Moore's voice on the recording with Wells. Every element aligned perfectly with the events preceding Wells's disappearance. Crowe declared this was no longer a missing person case, but a premeditated homicide. She directed the data unit to locate the current residences of both individuals. Federal Systems located Jacob Larson, now 52, living in Flagstaff, Arizona, working as a private laboratory technician. His name had appeared in a 2017 medical licensing database with no criminal record, but 4 address changes in 10 years. Lillian Moore, 59, was identified practicing psychiatry in Chicago, Illinois, under the professional name Dr. L.M. Harrow, a combination using her second husband's surname after remarrying in 2008. She owned a private clinic in Lincoln Park and was an adjunct professor at Northwestern University. What caught Crowe's attention was that both had left Minnesota within months of the Wells file being closed in 1994. Larson resigned in May. Moore transferred to Illinois in June, coinciding exactly with the Winona Police Department sealing the case. Crowe ordered federal records to review travel history, bank accounts, and any post-1994 connections between the two. A report 24 hours later revealed Moore and Larson had attended the same medical conference in Milwaukee in 1997 and exchanged emails regarding a sedative research project chaired by Moore. Crowe reviewed recovered emails from an old server and highlighted a line from Moore. "I still believe you can keep quiet. It's all in the past." The wording prompted her to flag it in red with the note: "Possible ongoing relationship, concealment factor." To prevent leaks, Crowe coordinated with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota to obtain federal arrest warrants charging conspiracy to commit murder under 18 U.S.C. Section 1117, and obstruction of justice by perjury and evidence concealment. On September 3, 2022, she presented the full evidence package to the Joint FBI Committee. DNA reports, fingerprints, voice analysis, timeline diagram, and autopsy conclusion. The FBI Minneapolis representative, Special Agent Derek Shaw, assessed the file as highly integrity-worthy and sufficient to elevate the investigation to federal level due to interstate elements and prolonged suspicion. The discussion lasted over 2 hours. Ultimately, the warrants were approved and signed by federal judge Alice Morton. 2 separate warrants were issued, warrant hash 22941A for Jacob Larson and warrant hash 22942B for Lillian Moore. Crowe received the documents at 1845 that day and immediately faxed and emailed them to the FBI Phoenix and Chicago field offices for coordinated execution. The Joint Task Force located Larson renting a small apartment near Cedar Street in a quiet Flagstaff suburb. He worked at Desert Clinical Labs, a private drug testing facility, earned a stable income, lived alone, and had no legal issues. Moore ran her psychology practice in Chicago with a personal assistant and maintained the public image of a successful physician who frequently spoke at professional conferences. Crowe ordered absolute secrecy until exact locations and timing were confirmed. In an internal multi-office FBI video conference, she emphasized, no information leaks before execution. Both have medical backgrounds, understand investigative procedure, and could react quickly if alerted. Simultaneously, the cold case unit's technical team verified Larson's phone and bank records, one recent $4,200 transaction to an account under L.M. Harrow and Associates, labeled Research Consulting. This confirmed ongoing financial ties, strengthening the basis for expanding the investigation into continuing conspiracy to conceal. That night, in the cold St. Paul headquarters office, Crowe sat before the screen. The glow reflecting off the bold text on the warrants, United States of America vs. Lillian Moore, Jacob Larson. After 30 years, 2 names that had once been mere witnesses in Dr. Aaron Wells's disappearance were now officially nationwide fugitives. She closed the file, looked out the fogged window at the city lights of St. Paul glowing yellow below. Every road now led to 2 places, Flagstaff, Arizona and Chicago, Illinois, and Crowe knew that what they would soon uncover there would be not just confessions, but the final chapter of a story that began in the Minnesota winter of 1994 and had seemed forever buried beneath the thick snow of Lake Pepin. At dawn on September 7, 2022, pursuant to federal arrest warrant hash 22941A, FBI agents, supported by Arizona State Police, executed the arrest of Jacob Larson at his second-floor apartment on Cedar Street, Flagstaff. It was still dark, thick fog cloaking the surrounding pine forest, red and blue police lights reflecting off the windows. At 6:15, as Larson stepped out to leave for work, the task force moved in, read the warrant, and handcuffed him on the spot. He offered no resistance, only asked quietly, "This is about Wells, isn't it?" and bowed his head in silence. The entire operation was recorded and lasted under 3 minutes. A search warrant was executed immediately afterward. Inside the small apartment, investigators seized a laptop, 2 portable hard drives, and a 5-cm thick folder containing copies of his 1993 Minnesota license, and a photo of him with Dr. Lillian Moore taken at the 1997 Milwaukee Medical Conference. All items were sealed and transferred to the evidence unit. That same day, Larson was transported to the Federal Detention Center in Phoenix for initial interrogation. Lieutenant Megan Crowe flew to Arizona that night and personally conducted the interview in the presence of appointed counsel. The interrogation room was brightly lit and cold, white light reflecting off the metal table. Larson sat across from her, prematurely gray, thin, eyes cloudy from lack of sleep. Crowe started the recorder. stated the time and location clearly, then began, "Mr. Jacob Larson, do you recognize the name Dr. Aaron Wells?" He nodded slightly. "I do. He was someone I used to work with at St. Croix." Crowe placed crime scene photos in front of him, the midazolam vial, latex gloves, and the lab coat. "Your DNA was found on the victim's collar. How do you explain that?" Larson stared at the images, his voice dropping. "I didn't kill him. I was just there that night." Crowe tilted her head. "So you admit you were at the Lake Pepin scene?" After a few seconds of silence, he nodded, breathing rapidly. "She said she just wanted to talk to him. I believed her." Crowe continued, "Who is she?" Larson answered without hesitation, "Lillian Moore." The recording paused briefly to confirm the name. Then Larson began to speak, voice trembling but coherent. "That night, she told me to follow Wells in my car. She said he was taking patient files and planning to leave the state. I didn't suspect anything, because Wells was already having psychological issues and skipping shifts. I parked a distance from his car and waited while she went to talk. I only saw them arguing, headlights flashing. Then she told me to help carry him out of the car. I was scared, but she said he had just passed out from the drug. I helped lift him, wrapped the coat around him. Then she told me to get a shovel. When I came back, Wells wasn't breathing anymore." Crowe looked at him and asked slowly, "Did you know what she injected him with?" Larson shook his head. "No, I just saw her pull a clear vial with a midazolam label from her pocket. She said it was a sedative dose. I didn't think she would actually do it." When asked why he never reported it, Larson clenched his fists, voice choking. "She told me to stay quiet, said the police would believe her because she was a doctor and I was just an intern. She said I would lose everything if I spoke." Crowe remained silent, observing his reaction. Larson lowered his head, shoulders shaking slightly. She continued, "After Wells died, what did the two of you do?" He answered, "She drove to Lake Pepin and made me dig the hole. Snow was falling so heavily, I could barely see beyond the headlights. We buried him, then she drove back to the hospital. I took a taxi home." She said, from the next day, to act like we had never met. Crowe asked, "Do you know why she wanted Wells dead?" Larson looked up, eyes clouded but voice firm. She said Wells was going to report her for improper prescriptions, and if investigated, the whole department would lose their licenses. She reminded me I owed her for getting me into the internship program, that if I just stayed quiet, we would both be safe. She convinced me Wells was the bad guy. I stupidly believed everything." Crowe stopped writing, exhaled, and asked, "Do you know if anyone else was involved?" Larson shook his head. "No, just the two of us. She planned it. I only followed orders." Those words were clearly recorded, along with the tremor in his voice as he continued. "She never asked me to kill anyone, but she knew I wouldn't refuse. She knew how to make me feel guilty, how to make me think I was helping save someone." Crowe closed the file, looked at Larson one last time. "Are you willing to cooperate fully with the FBI in the prosecution?" He answered softly, almost in surrender. "I've been silent for 30 years. Now I just want to tell the truth." Crowe turned off the recorder and left the room, a chill running down her spine. Outside, early Arizona sunlight streamed through the window, reflecting off the glass, showing her silhouette and that of the handcuffed, aging man behind her. One part of the truth had been spoken, but Crowe knew the remaining piece. The woman behind the entire story was the true center of the storm still waiting ahead. On September 10, 2022, 2 days after the initial interrogation, Lieutenant Megan Crowe conducted a supervised cognitive interview with psychological oversight of Jacob Larson at the federal facility in Phoenix. The session followed the standard cognitive interview protocol to recover detailed memories of the night of January 9, 1994. The date of the incident. The interview room was arranged to be quiet, with soft lighting and a recording camera positioned behind one-way glass. Present with Crowe was criminal psychologist Dr. Henry Blanchard, who supervised the process to ensure cognitive authenticity. To begin, Crowe asked Larson to close his eyes, breathe slowly, and mentally reconstruct the scene from that night. After a few minutes, Larson's voice grew hoarse but remained steady. I remember the snow falling heavily, the wind howling, and the hospital lights reflecting off the pavement. I was putting away equipment when Moore called me on the intercom and told me to stay and help her move some files to her car. When I got to the parking lot, Wells was just getting into his car. Moore told me to wait, said she'd talk to him quickly and come right back. Crowe let him pause for a few seconds, then asked, "Where exactly were you standing? How far away?" Larson answered, "About 10 meters away by the corner oak tree. I saw them talking, then Wells's car door opened and she leaned inside. He stopped, swallowing hard. That's when I saw her pull something from her coat pocket. Something metallic glinted." Crowe prompted, "A syringe?" Larson nodded. "Yes, I wasn't sure, but it looked like one. I saw her jab it into his arm." Wells jerked slightly, then his head slumped onto the steering wheel. Blanchard noted, "Reaction consistent with rapid onset sedation." Crowe continued, "What did she do next?" Larson said, "She opened the door, pulled him out, and called me over. I was scared, but she said I just needed to help get him into the back seat so he could rest. When I got close, Wells was almost unconscious, eyes closed, breathing shallow. She spoke very calmly. "It'll be quick, Jacob. Just help me." Crowe asked, "Did you touch Wells?" "Yes." I supported his shoulders. His coat had slipped off. I clearly remember the antiseptic smell, the same as in the ward. She asked him to describe Moore's demeanor again. Larson took a deep breath, his hands clenching. She wasn't shaking, wasn't panicking. Her eyes were focused, like she was conducting an experiment. She said, "Hold his head steady," then pick something up off the floor of the car, probably the dropped syringe. Right after that, she took a heavy object in her hand. It looked like a large metal flashlight and struck him hard on the back of the head. That sound. I'll never forget it. He stopped, voice choking. Blanchard reassured him. After nearly a minute, Larson continued. When Wells collapsed, I stepped back and asked, "What are you doing?" She said, "Don't be afraid. He can't feel anything now." Then she ordered, "Help me get him into the car. Hurry, the snow will cover everything." I did it. I don't know why. Crowe asked, "What did she say while you were moving the body?" Larson replied, "She didn't talk much, just muttered everything has to be clean." When we got near Lake Pepin, she stopped at a low spot and said, "Dig here." I got the shovel from the trunk and dug about 1/2 meter deep. The snow was wet and hard. She stood behind me, smoking, looking around. When I got tired, she said, "That's enough," then told me to put him in. She personally straightened his lab coat, folded his hands across his chest like he was sleeping. Then she covered him with his overcoat and said, "Aaron will be at peace." Crowe asked for more precise location details. "Do you remember any terrain features?" Larson closed his eyes and recalled. There was a broken tree trunk lying diagonally to the west. The ground sloped down to the lake, and on the left, there was an old wooden survey stake. "I think that's exactly where you found him." Blanchard noted the description matched the excavation coordinates N44°29'52 inches, Buddy is 92°07'13. Crowe continued, "Did she leave anything in the car?" "No. She wiped her hands with wet wipes, burned the gloves, and tossed the vial to the edge of the snow. Then she told me to take a cab back and gave me $100. She said, 'If anyone asks, say he was planning to take a few days off.'" Crowe asked, "Did you receive anything else afterward?" "A week later she called, told me to stay quiet, and promised to get me into a research program in Illinois, but I refused." When Crowe asked Larson to describe Moore's psychological state at the time, he spoke slowly. "She was like she was in a self-induced trance. No tears, no trembling. She believed she was right, that Wells deserved to be eliminated. I think she truly believed it." At the end of the interview, Blanchard assessed that Larson showed no signs of confabulation. The statement was spontaneous recollection with emotions consistent with genuine memory. Crowe recorded the entire account, The detailed description of Moore injecting the drug, assaulting Wells, burying the body, and destroying evidence, all fully consistent with current forensic findings. She concluded in her report, the cognitive interview with Jacob Larson confirms his presence at the scene, establishes Lillian Moore's active role in administering midazolam, inflicting cranial trauma, directing burial, and manipulating the witness. The statement is consistent with DNA data, excavation location, and drug samples. Crowe closed the file, her expression heavy, because despite having obtained the truth, she still clearly felt one hard-to-accept reality. Moore had not acted impulsively. She had prepared, calculated, and made Larson believe the crime was the right thing to do. As she left the room, Crowe said softly, almost to herself, 30 years, and the memory still retains its exact shape. On the morning of September 14, 2022, after completing analysis of Jacob Larson's statement and receiving confirmation from the U.S. Attorney's Office that there was sufficient basis to execute an arrest warrant, Lieutenant Megan Crowe coordinated with the FBI Chicago Field Office and the Chicago Police Department to carry out the arrest of Dr. Lillian Moore, currently practicing under the legal name Dr. L.M. Harrow. The takedown was meticulously planned over 3 days, led by Supervisory Special Agent Peter Lang, with the objective of a safe arrest that would not affect patients or clinic staff. At 8:20 a.m., federal task force agents in plain clothes surrounded the 3-story building in Lincoln Park, where Moore operated the psychology practice Harrow and Associates. Outside, the street remained busy. Civilians were unaware an operation was underway. As Moore finished her first consultation of the day, 2 FBI agents entered and presented federal arrest warrant hash 22942. B1 agent read aloud, Dr. Lillian Moore, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of federal justice. Moore froze for several seconds, her eyes blinking rapidly, but her face showed no emotion. She asked quietly, who authorized this? And received the firm reply, the U.S. District Court of Minnesota, Judge Morton. Handcuffs were placed on her wrists right there, in front of the stunned gazes of 2 nurses. The entire process occurred in silence, without resistance. Only the sound of heels echoing on the tile as they escorted her out. Simultaneously, the search team executed the warrant at the clinic. On the 2nd floor, in her office, they discovered 2 patient file cabinets containing hundreds of records, many labeled Behavioral Control Therapy, 1993, 1995. A brown leather notebook was kept separately in the desk drawer, bearing the handwritten title on the cover. Notes. When opened, it was filled with dense handwriting mixing clinical terminology. Bipolar affective disorder, inhibitory response, potential for internal conflict eruption. The name Aaron W. appeared repeatedly in entries from mid-December 1993. Crowe, via secure video link, ordered the entire contents photographed and the notebook sealed as Exhibit 03. Additionally, inside the safe behind the desk, Agent Lang located a portable hard drive and a large envelope containing 12 financial statements showing regular transfers to an account in Flagstaff in the name of Jacob Larson, matching transactions previously identified. All evidence was seized, inventoried on-site, and sealed in FBI evidence bags. As Moore was led to the vehicle, a local reporter began filming, but the team ordered broadcasting stopped to protect the federal warrant. The only image from that day was of a silver-haired woman in a white lab coat stepping out of the clinic that once bore her name. At the FBI Chicago headquarters, Moore was placed in a special interrogation room. Crowe flew in that same afternoon, bringing copies of the case file and expert reports. Upon entering, she saw Moore sitting straight-backed, hands neatly folded on the table, eyes lowered to the floor, face calm to the point of coldness. After reading the Miranda rights, Crowe began, "Do you know why you've been arrested?" Moore replied softly, "I assume it's about something old." Crowe presented the evidence, recovered audio, fingerprints on the vial, and the Wells autopsy report. Moore looked at each photograph without her eyes wavering. She only said, "I have nothing to say. If you want to talk, speak to my attorney." Crowe asked one final time, "Do you deny any involvement in Dr. Wells's death?" Moore looked up and met her gaze. "I neither deny nor confirm." Everyone remembers that night differently. The ambiguous, yet icy response left the room silent. Crowe stopped writing and signaled to end the recording. Immediately after the interview, Moore's private attorney, Martin Graves, filed a motion to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment. In the internal memo, Crowe wrote, "Subject maintained silence, non-cooperative. Demeanor calm, self-controlled, no visible fear. Invoked counsel and refused to sign the statement transcript." That evening, Moore was transferred to the Federal Metropolitan Correctional Center in Chicago under special supervision. The seized materials and therapy notebooks were transported under security to the St. Paul Technical Lab. As Crowe stepped out of the FBI building, Chicago was raining hard, heavy drops sliding down the car windows. She looked toward the darkened windows of the now sealed Harrow and Associates Clinic, where the words, "Closed by federal order," reflected police lights. After 30 years, the woman who once stood at the end of a snowy parking lot in Winona was now in handcuffs. Yet Crowe still heard Larson's words from the earlier interview. She wasn't afraid. She believed she was right. And looking into Moore's serene eyes at the moment of arrest, she knew the investigation had not yet reached the deepest part of the story. On September 18, 2022, at the request of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and with approval from the Northern District of Illinois, Dr. Lillian Moore was transferred to the Federal Psychiatric Evaluation Center in Chicago for a pretrial assessment of cognitive capacity and psychological behavior. The 7-day evaluation was conducted by a team led by Dr. Catherine Lowe, a clinical psychologist specializing in medical personality disorders. Dr. Lowe and 2 colleagues performed a series of semi-structured interviews, neuropsychological testing, and the MMPI-2RF and PCLR assessments. Preliminary results showed Moore was fully alert, correctly oriented to time and place, with intact long-term memory, but exhibited abnormally high emotional control, flat affect, and virtually no physiological arousal when discussing sensitive events. During the first 3 sessions, when asked about her professional past, Moore spoke clearly, describing in detail her therapy cases at St. Croix Medical Center and asserting that she always adhered to medical ethics. However, when Dr. Aaron Wells's name was mentioned, her heart rate increased by 12 beats per minute, and her pupils dilated, yet her voice remained unchanged. "He was a troubled man, volatile, and emotionally dependent. I only tried to help him," Lowe noted. Subject displays responsibility shifting, avoidance of guilt factors, consistent with narcissistic personality patterns. On the personality inventory, Moore scored 31/40ths on the PCLR, above the 30 threshold for psychopathic traits. She clearly exhibited 2 primary features: grandiosity with belief in being above rules, and lack of empathy for victims. When asked about her relationship with Wells, Moore replied, "He needed me. Without me he would have been suspended long before. But then he turned on me. I only did what was necessary to keep everything in order." That statement was recorded in the evaluation as evidence of rationalization of unethical behavior combined with ego-protective grandiosity. The team also reviewed old employment records, especially Moore's 1992-1994 period at St. Croix. Internal disciplinary files showed at least 2 patients had complained about Moore excessively intervening in personal decisions. But when investigated, she denied it, and the matters were dropped. A former colleague, Dr. Gerald Winters, provided a supplemental statement that Moore often overstepped authority, manipulated younger staff, making them dependent on her approval. This information was included in the behavioral history section. Subject has a pattern of controlling others' emotions and actions, demonstrated through strong psychological influence over subordinates. Displays manipulation and maintenance of power through a reward-punishment system. Further corroboration came from notes seized at Harrow and Associates. In patient entries, experts found subjective comments such as compliant response when directed, must maintain dependency state for therapeutic efficacy. Moore's handwritten remarks were interpreted as evidence of power reenactment mechanisms, a tendency to recreate control structures with everyone around her. Lowe's final report concluded, subject exhibits pathological narcissism, accompanied by manipulation of others to maintain control and protect self-image. High rational thinking, absence of appropriate emotional response to others' suffering. Behavior in the instant offense is consistent with narcissistic homicide, killing due to threat to reputation and power. When asked whether Moore was capable of understanding her actions were wrong at the time of the offense, Lowe affirmed, yes, fully criminally responsible. The 42-page report also noted no history of psychosis, delusions, or paranoia, but signs of chronic power control syndrome. In the final comments, the team described Moore's demeanor throughout the evaluation as serene to the point of chilling, using academic language to distance herself from guilt consequences. She said, "No one truly understands what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you save. I only put everything back in its place." That sentence was recorded verbatim and underlined in red ink. Upon reading the summary, Crowe wrote only one line in her investigation notebook: "No panic, no remorse, only justification." For her, this was no longer the profile of someone who lost control due to mental illness, but the complete portrait of a deliberate, calculating individual capable of manipulating others' emotions to achieve her goals. The final report sent to the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office concluded clearly. Subject is competent to stand trial. Psychological condition, narcissistic personality disorder. With manipulative and controlling behavior, history of using professional authority to dominate dependent individuals. No impairment of reality testing observed. When Crowe signed receipt of the evaluation, a late afternoon thunderstorm rolled over Chicago. She looked out the window where rain streaks divided the city like cuts, and for a moment she realized that for Moore, Wells's death had probably never been a crime. It was simply the logical outcome for someone who believed she had the right to decide life and death. On September 22, 2022, 3 days after the psychological evaluation concluded, the Minnesota State Forensic Laboratory received all materials seized from Harrow and Associates for content analysis and handwriting examination. The most critical item was the brown leather personal therapy notebook designated Exhibit 03, filled with dense black ink notes interspersed with psychological charts and highly personal commentary. Lieutenant Megan Crowe and forensic technician Will Haney began reviewing page by page chronologically. In the December 1993 section, among evaluations of patient, they discovered a separate passage marked with a small triangle in the upper left corner, different from Moore's usual notation style. The handwritten text read, "Jacob needs to learn to take responsibility. His loyalty will be tested when the time comes. He owes me trust," and silence. The phrases "take responsibility" and "tested" were underlined twice in red pen. The next entry, dated January 3, 1994, just 6 days before Wells disappeared, stated AW continues to obstruct the treatment process. Grandiose, refuses guidance. Solution: remove the disruptive element. Jacob will assist if properly directed. That sentence made Crowe stop reading immediately. The room fell silent for several seconds before she ordered photographs, backups, and transfer of the entire document to the handwriting unit. At the St. Paul Forensic Laboratory, handwriting analyst Catherine Morelli compared stroke patterns, slant, letter spacing, and pen pressure against known samples of Moore's writing from 1993 hospital records and administrative logs. Results confirmed a 99.5% match. No doubt, every note in Exhibit 03 was written by Lillian Moore herself. Morelli added, red underlining was added contemporaneously, not later. Ink matches the Parker Quink red Moore used in medical files at the time. The report was immediately forwarded to the cold case unit. Crowe read carefully, annotating margins, evidence of premeditation, names Jacob, uses directive language. When cross-referenced with Larson's cognitive interview statement describing Moore saying he owed her silence, the meaning aligned perfectly, eliminating any possibility. Larson fabricated his account and reinforcing that Moore had psychologically manipulated him before the crime. In the next entry, dated January 6, 1994, Moore wrote, "Situation reaching crisis threshold. AW prepared to betray. Jacob has been prepared. He will act the moment I say." These sentences no longer resembled clinical notes. They read exactly like the diary of a premeditated plan. Beneath that passage, she drew a straight pencil line, then wrote the final line, "Balance must be restored, and I will be the one to decide." The phrase "restore balance" was interpreted by investigators as a metaphor for eliminating wells, an act Moore considered ethically and psychologically justified. At the very end of the notebook, on an undated final page, was only the short sentence, "After that night, silence is healing." All these passages were digitized and added to the evidence catalog as Evidence Exhibit 03A. The FBI Legal Analysis Unit assessed, "Document reflects pre-offense mindset, with elements of direction and anticipated use of another person to achieve personal ends, sufficient to constitute premeditation evidence." Crowe compiled everything, linking the notebook entries to the timeline. January 3, Moore writes, "Remove the disruptive element." January 9, Wells disappears. Larson's statement confirms she ordered burial near Lake Pepin. The chronology matched perfectly. When the interim report was complete, Crowe called the Minnesota U.S. Attorney to inform them they had found the final piece. Motive, planning, and manipulation documented in the suspect's own handwriting. That same afternoon, the U.S. Attorney's Office issued an internal memo classifying Exhibit 03 as primary premeditation evidence, direct proof of preparation and direction to commit murder. The 37-page technical report detailed the examination process and quoted verbatim the passages demonstrating control and psychological threat. In the conclusion, analyst Morelli wrote, "Forgery is impossible. All handwriting characteristics, word choice, and sentence structure show Moore was not merely recording but reasoning, justifying, and mentally preparing for an act of elimination against an individual she viewed as disrupting order." When Crowe placed the copy of the document on her desk, afternoon light streamed through the window and fell across the red underlined words, "Jacob needs to learn to take responsibility." She stared at them for a long time, a chill running down her spine, then closed the notebook and said softly, "And in the end." These very lines taught her what real responsibility means. On September 24, 2022, during the review of seized evidence at the Harrow and Associates Clinic, the Imaging Forensics Division of the St. Paul Technical Services Department discovered a small sealed envelope that was not included in the original inventory. On the front of the envelope was a faint handwritten note in blue ink, "Therapy reference, 1994. When opened, it contained 4 time-faded Polaroid photographs measuring 9 by 11 centimeters. 3 of them depicted the interior of the old clinic, but the 4th one made the forensics team pause. It showed Dr. Aaron Wells sitting in a brown leather chair with white light slanting in from a window and the familiar filing cabinet from Moore's office at St. Croix in 1994 visible in the background. Wells was wearing a white lab coat, his eyes slightly downcast, his face showing exhaustion, holding a paper cup bearing the hospital logo. In the lower corner of the photo, in thin pen strokes, was a handwritten caption, "Last day." The phrase was written in concise English, in pale brown ink, matching the type of Parker pen ink Moore used in the therapy notebook. Exhibit 03. The photograph was immediately transferred to the fingerprint and fiber analysis unit. After processing with ultraviolet light and nenhydrin reagent, technicians identified 2 sets of fingerprints, the first belonging to Aaron Wells, confirmed by DNA from the remains, the second belonging to Lillian Moore, matching the sample on file from her medical license records. Notably, Moore's fingerprints were located in the upper right corner, directly beside the words, "Last Day." This indicated that Moore herself had written the caption and handled the photo after it was taken. The estimated date of the photograph, based on the Polaroid 600 film type and the faint serial number printed on the back, matched a batch distributed in the Minneapolis area in December 1993, just weeks before Wells disappeared. In addition to trace evidence analysis, technicians used fluorescent spectroscopy to examine the light reflections on the photo's surface. They discovered that the background light reflection showed the location was not St. Croix Hospital as Moore had previously claimed, but her private apartment in Winona, confirmed by distinctive details, blue and white striped curtains, and an antique Seth Thomas wall clock, matching items seized in 1995 archival images. The technical report concluded the photograph documents Dr. Wells's presence in the suspect's private residence in violation of professional ethics and contrary to previously stated timelines. The handwritten caption "Last Days" constitutes evidence of conscious intent, reflecting the notion of closing a chapter or a deliberate event. When Lieutenant Megan Crowe received the analysis, she ordered the evidence rushed to the cold case unit for cross-referencing with the therapy notebook, Exhibit 03. A connection was quickly established in the notebook. Moore had written "AW ready to betray. Jacob will assist if guided properly," written with the same ink and pen as the caption on the photo. This proved the Polaroid was not a random picture, but part of the same series of documents Moore kept to maintain control of the situation. Crowe ordered a re-examination of all other photographic evidence. A technician discovered that the two remaining photos also bore Moore's fingerprints but had no captions. They only showed corners of the room, therapy desk, patient chair, and filing cabinet. When the reflective metal surface on the wall was enlarged, the clear reflection of a tall woman holding the camera, hair in a bun, wearing a white lab coat, was visible, matching Moore's appearance in 1993 hospital personnel photos. A scene description from the photos was added to the report as supporting evidence, photos taken in natural light from a static angle, indicating the subject had complete control of the setting. No indication Wells was aware he was being recorded. That same day, Crowe ordered full digital scanning of all photographs and the sealing of Exhibit 04, photographic evidence. In the sealing report, she noted, "Photos taken prior to disappearance, bearing caption implying termination, highly symbolic. Suspect's fingerprints confirmed direct involvement." When the report was submitted to the state prosecutor's office, Special Prosecutor Henry Lowell stated that this was the critical link needed to unite all evidence into a logical chain: motive, means, act, and evidence of conscious planning. A complete chain was established, showing Moore not only orchestrated the crime, but documented the process in her own way, as if she wished to control even the memory of the offense. In the final summary, Crowe wrote, "Exhibit 04 confirms premeditation through imagery, consistent with the context of the notes. This evidence reinforces the premeditation, execution, record structure, characteristic of highly controlled criminal behavior." As she closed the case file, the light from the room's lamp reflected off the plastic-protected photograph, where Wells's face appeared blurred in aged sepia tones. The words "Last Day" slanted along the edge, like an unspoken confession, closing a 30-year wait in the case. A trace sufficient to connect every remaining fragment of the 1994 Minnesota file. On September 28, 2022, pursuant to directives from the Minnesota State Prosecutor's Office, a formal confrontation between Lillian Moore and Jacob Larson was held in Federal Interrogation Room 3A at the FBI St. Paul headquarters. The room was completely sealed, with only 4 people present, supervising Special Agent Peter Lang, Lieutenant Megan Crowe, and the 2 separately secured defendants. Larson was transported from Arizona under federal detention, gaunt and weary-looking but alert. Moore entered afterward, wearing a gray shirt, hands still cuffed in front, demeanor calm. When the two faced each other across a distance of just over 3 meters, the atmosphere was so heavy that Crowe's pen could be heard scratching as she took notes. Crowe began by stating the purpose. This is a confrontation to establish the operational connection between the two defendants in the 1994 disappearance and murder of Dr. Aaron Wells. All statements are being recorded and carry legal weight. Moore nodded slightly. Larson stared at the table, hands trembling lightly. Crowe asked Larson to recount the events of the night of January 9, 1994. He spoke slowly, voice hoarse. I drove according to her instructions. She gave me a map and said Wells needed to be taught a lesson. I thought it was just to scare him, but she handed me the drugs and told me the exact dosage, every step. When Wells collapsed, I panicked, and she just stood there watching. Crowe placed the Polaroid bearing the caption "Last Day" in front of Moore and asked, "Do you confirm this is a photo you took yourself, bearing both your and the victim's fingerprints, taken in your private residence?" Moore stared at the photo for a long time before answering. "I worked with him. If there's a photo, it's just a professional memory. I don't deny handling the picture." Crowe then presented copies of the therapy notebook, Exhibit 03, containing entries about Jacob. Take responsibility. Silence. Eliminate the disruptive element. When asked their meaning, Moore replied calmly, "Those are internal notes for patient behavior evaluation. I can't control how others interpret them." Larson reacted sharply. "You're lying. You wrote those words and then called me to your house. You said Wells was betraying us and needed to be eliminated. I didn't understand. I just did it because I was afraid of you." Crowe allowed a few seconds of silence, then asked Larson to describe the specific instructions. Larson continued, "She told me to mix the drug from the midazolam vial, said it would make Wells calm forever. When I hesitated, she yelled, 'You owe me loyalty.' I did it until he stopped moving." Moore maintained her posture, eyes slightly lowered, and said softly, "He's imagining things. I never ordered anyone killed." Crowe immediately read from the evidence reports, Moore's fingerprints on the drug vial, handwriting in the notebook, and the photo caption all matched samples. She asked, "If you were not involved, how does every piece of evidence bear your fingerprints?" Moore replied, "I'm a doctor. I handle drugs. I write notes. What he did with them, I can't control." Agent Lang interjected, "You don't deny giving Larson the map and the drugs?" Moore fell silent. Crowe noted, "Subject avoids direct questions, substitutes broad interpretations, classic legal evasion." After 15 minutes, Crowe moved to the restored audio evidence from the cassette tape. When the recording played, Wells's voice mixed with Moore's could be heard, "I don't want to be part of this anymore, Lillian." Then a thud, followed by silence. Crowe stopped the tape and looked at Moore. "Do you confirm that is your voice?" Moore nodded slowly. "It sounds similar." Larson broke down crying, choking out, "I've heard that sound in my head for 30 years. Crowe showed no reaction, only writing in the record, "Larson confirms tape matches events immediately prior to disappearance. Testimony consistent." As the confrontation entered its second hour, Crowe summarized the entire chain of evidence: the Polaroid, therapy notes, fingerprints on the drug vial, Larson's testimony, the audio recording, and the Wells autopsy conclusion, death by midazolam overdose and cranial trauma. She concluded, "All elements constitute premeditated joint enterprise. Larson was the executor, Moore the mastermind, director, and psychological controller." Moore's expression remained unchanged. She only said, "You call that evidence. I call it the interpretation of people who don't understand therapy." Crowe replied, "You do not deny the technical details, dosage, timing, location." Moore lifted her head, a metallic glint flashing in her eyes, then fell silent. Agent Lang checked the clock and declared the confrontation concluded at 11:47. Immediately afterward, Crowe and the investigation team finalized a 62-page summary breaking down both parties' statements and identifying objectively consistent points. Moore supplied the drugs and map. Larson was present at the scene. Wells was last seen in Moore's private residence. Evidence matches DNA and fingerprints. Audio confirms voices. The final investigative report, code MN 9420 seconds. Final concluded, based on physical audio documentary and direct testimony evidence, sufficient grounds exist to establish Lillian Moore as the organizer, director and preparer of the act resulting in the death of Dr. Aaron Wells. Jacob Larson executed the act under psychological influence and manipulation, but with awareness. Recommendation: prosecute both for first-degree murder under Minnesota law. The document was submitted to State Prosecutor Henry Lowell the same day. As she signed the report, Crowe added a final line in her notebook: 30 years, every piece has fallen into place. The controller and the controlled, neither escapes the truth. As she left the room, she glanced through the glass at Moore being escorted away, face expressionless, eyes staring straight ahead, cold as steel. Larson walked with head bowed, hands clenched. Crowe walked slowly down the hallway, carrying the thick case file, the final report that closed the longest investigation of her career. On October 3, 2022, after receiving the final investigative report, MEN 9420 seconds, final from Lieutenant Megan Crowe and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Minnesota State Prosecutor officially completed the indictment against defendants Lillian Moore and Jacob Larson. The 48-page indictment, signed by Chief Prosecutor Henry Lowell, charged 3 primary counts: first-degree premeditated murder, use of a controlled anesthetic substance resulting in death, and obstruction of justice. The grounds for prosecution were detailed, including physical evidence, digital evidence, and statements from the confrontation between the 2 defendants. On the day of release, the Minnesota Public Defender's Office, appointed separate counsel attorney Martin Graves, continued representing Moore, while Jacob Larson was represented by young attorney Evan Walsh, who specialized in cases involving psychologically influenced offenders. A closed meeting among the parties was held at Ramsey County Courthouse in St. Paul, overseen by Judge Thomas Keating, who would preside over the trial. At the pretrial procedure hearing, Graves immediately filed a motion to exclude the audio evidence, arguing that the restored cassette tape was severely degraded and the chain of custody was unreliable. He claimed the audio could have been altered during technical restoration, citing Minnesota Rule of Evidence 901B on authentication of recordings. The prosecution objected immediately, presenting certification from the Federal Audio Forensics Lab, confirming that restoration used only frequency enhancement and did not alter content. Prosecutor Lowell stated, "Chain of custody was fully documented, every transfer was signed for. Restoration did not affect content, only recovered the original damaged audio." Judge Keating ordered both sides to submit supplemental technical reports within 7 days for pretrial review of admissibility. Simultaneously, defense counsel requested severance of Larson's case from Moore's, arguing that Larson was a manipulated victim with no shared criminal intent. Lowell opposed, asserting that Larson's actions, though psychologically influenced, contained voluntary elements and could not be tried separately. After 2 hours of argument, the court provisionally maintained joint prosecution and scheduled reconsideration upon additional psychological evidence. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office completed remaining procedures, issuing subpoenas for witnesses, including 3 individuals who worked with Moore at St. Croix Medical Center in 1994, and 2 independent forensic experts in DNA and toxicology. Trial was scheduled to open January 17, 2023, in Ramsey County Courthouse, Courtroom 4, before a 12-person jury. Judge Keating signed the order and imposed a gag order on most case details due to sensitive medical and personal evidence. Media access would be limited to public information after the trial began. Immediately thereafter, Crowe's investigation team continued coordinating with the prosecutor's office to review all evidence for chain of custody integrity. Crowe ordered re-examination of the 1994 crime scene reports and the Polaroid photos to ensure unbroken custody, and prepared a new affidavit on the audio restoration process to counter anticipated challenges from Graves. In closed meetings, Prosecutor Lowell emphasized that the upcoming trial would hinge more on the weight of physical evidence than testimony, as Moore had chosen complete silence. He directed the forensic team to build a 3D model of the Lake Pepin crime scene for presentation to the jury, reconstructing the route, weather conditions, and burial location to corroborate Larson's testimony and Moore's indirect involvement. Meanwhile, Graves filed an additional motion to exclude the Polaroid photo on grounds that the exact date of the photograph cannot be established, arguing it was merely professional documentation with no criminal implication. Lowell countered with technical evidence from the lab. The Polaroid serial number matched a late 1993 production batch routinely purchased by Moore, confirming timing consistent with Wells's disappearance. After 3 days of review, Keating issued a preliminary ruling admitting all prosecution evidence, including the photos, therapy notebook, drug vial, and audio recording, and scheduled a November 28, 2022, pretrial hearing to qualify expert witnesses. As the hearing ended, Crowe walked out of the courthouse holding the freshly printed indictment. She knew 30 years of work had finally brought the case to the threshold of justice. On the first page, in bold letters, State of Minnesota versus Lillian Moore and Jacob Larson, murder in the first degree, 1994. Cold autumn wind blew through the Ramsey County Courthouse corridor, swirling dry leaves around the stone steps. In that moment, Crowe knew the story was not over, but the most important part of the truth had been placed on the scales of justice. On the morning of January 17, 2023, Ramsey County Courthouse, Courtroom 4, opened the public trial of State of Minnesota versus Lillian Moore and Jacob Larson, presided over by Judge Thomas Keating. The courtroom was packed. The press section was filled by reporters from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, St. Paul Pioneer Press, and CBS Local News. When police escorted the two defendants in, the room fell silent. Moore appeared in a light gray suit, face calm, gaze fixed forward. Larson followed, shoulders hunched, face gaunt. The trial began at 9:02 a.m. Chief Prosecutor Henry Lowell stood and delivered his opening statement. 30 years ago, on a blizzard night, Dr. Aaron Wells vanished. Today, we are here to bring that truth back into the light. He outlined the case, the investigation process, the recovery of remains, physical evidence, and restored audio evidence. On the large screen behind him appeared an image of Lake Pepin, where Wells's body was found in 2022. Lowell methodically introduced each category of evidence, beginning with Exhibit 1, the midazolam vial bearing Lillian Moore's fingerprints, found in the snow 200 meters from Wells's vehicle. Exhibit 2, the therapy notebook. Exhibit 03, containing entries such as, eliminate the disruptive element, and Jacob will assist. Exhibit 3, the Polaroid of Wells in Moore's residence, with the handwritten caption, last day. Lowell pointed toward Moore. The defendant herself preserved evidence of her own crime. He paused, then moved to the digital evidence, the restored cassette recording, confirmed to have been made on the day Wells disappeared. Before playing it, the court confirmed the defendant's right to hear the evidence. Moore nodded slightly. Larson remained silent. When the audio played, static mixed with Wells's voice, I don't want to continue this, Lillian. This is wrong. A female voice replied, low but firm. You'll understand later. Everything ends tonight. Then the sound of a heavy object falling, followed by silence. The courtroom was absolutely still, only the faint hum of the recording equipment audible. When the tape ended, Lowell said, that was the last sound Dr. Wells ever made. From the prosecution table, Lieutenant Megan Crowe was called to the witness stand. She was sworn in and began recounting the entire investigation timeline, from the cold case review to evidence recovery and arrests. Her voice was clear and steady, every detail presented chronologically. She described discovering the therapy notebook in Moore's clinic drawer, how technicians found both Larson's DNA and Moore's fingerprints on the same items, and the process of restoring the cassette audio at the St. Paul Technical Lab. Each time she mentioned Wells's name, many in the room looked down. When the prosecutor asked Lieutenant Crowe at the time of evidence recovery, "Did you believe this was a premeditated act?" she answered firmly, "Yes." Every detail pointed to meticulous preparation, psychological control, and manipulation of another person's behavior. Moore didn't just know Wells was going to disappear, she made it happen. From the defense table, attorney Martin Graves immediately rose to object, accusing Crowe of subjective interpretation. Judge Keating allowed cross-examination. Graves asked, "Do you have direct evidence that my client ordered a murder?" Crowe replied, "The circumstantial evidence is consistent with coordination. Direct verbal orders are not required to prove intent when every other element aligns." Graves pressed his lips together and asked no further questions. The prosecution continued displaying photographic evidence, 1994 crime scene photos, route maps, Lake Pepin sonar, images showing the excavation site, and the hand-drawn map by Moore, matching the route Larson described. When the Polaroid appeared on screen, Lowell pointed out every detail: the blue and white curtains, filing cabinet, light reflection on the clock, all matching items seized from Moore's home. He said, "No one takes a professional memory photo and writes last day on it." Defense again objected, moving to strike the photo as unduly prejudicial, but Keating overruled, ruling it lawful evidence of premeditative awareness. Crowe continued testifying throughout the morning, describing the confrontation between Moore and Larson. When asked how did Moore react when Larson stated she gave the order, Crowe answered, "She never denied the technical details, only deflected by saying everyone misinterprets. To me that was silent confirmation." The statement made the atmosphere in the courtroom even heavier. Near noon, Lowell requested the jury hear the final portion of the cassette again, the thud and the sound of a body falling. When the audio stopped, some spectators lowered their heads. A few left the room. Moore sat motionless, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the screen. After the audio evidence, the court recessed for lunch. When the afternoon session resumed, Lowell summarized the entire chain of evidence in his presentation. "We have motive. Wells threatened Moore's reputation. We have means. Midazolam taken from her own pharmacy. We have the executor, Larson, controlled by her. And finally, we have Wells's own words, recorded moments before his death." He paused, looking toward the jury box. This was not a mistake. This was a plan. At 5 p.m., the first day of trial concluded. Judge Keating admitted all physical evidence and approved continued presentation of forensic exhibits on the following day. Crowe stepped down from the witness stand and passed Moore. Their eyes met briefly, one gaze the pursuit of justice, the other the conviction that she still controlled the narrative. On the table in front of the jury lay the Polaroid photograph, beneath the faded caption, "Last Day." On the morning of January 18, 2023, the trial entered its second day, with the focus placed entirely on the testimony of defendant Jacob Larson, the former intern at St. Croix Hospital and the only living witness who knew exactly what happened the night Dr. Aaron Wells disappeared. As he was escorted into the courtroom by police, Larson appeared to be trembling, his eyes deeply sunken, yet his voice initially remained steady. Judge Keating demanded order as Larson was sworn in. Prosecutor Henry Lowell began the direct examination. He asked Larson to recount every detail of the evening of January 9, 1994. The night officially recorded as the time of Wells's death. Larson took a long breath and said, "That night, I left the hospital around 10:30. I got a call from Dr. Moore. She said she needed to meet about transferring a patient. I went to her apartment in Winona. The snow was so heavy the wheels got stuck twice. When I walked in, Wells was already there. He was sitting in the chair, and she was standing by the table, holding a vial and a syringe." He paused, his voice breaking. I knew right away it wasn't medical. Crowe, seated in the gallery, took notes on every detail. Larson continued. She told me to prepare a dose of midazolam, saying it was just to let him rest. I asked why. And she said, he betrayed me, betrayed the whole treatment program. You owe me loyalty. When Wells tried to stand, she told me to hold his arm. I didn't want to, but she yelled, "Do it, Jacob." I injected him. After a few minutes, Wells collapsed, eyes wide open. The courtroom fell silent. Lowell asked, and then, Larson answered. She was calm and ice cold. She checked his pulse and said, "Take him away, I've already prepared the place." I asked where, and she pointed out the window toward the road leading to Lake Pepin. He described how the two of them put the body in the trunk of Wells's Ford Taurus and drove out of town. I drove, she sat beside me. Silent. When we reached the lake shore, the wind was fierce, snow blowing everywhere. She told me to dig, but the ground was frozen. Finally she said, "That's enough," and helped me cover him with snow. Before we left, she said, "After tonight, we never speak of this again." Lowell asked, "Did she threaten you?" Larson nodded. She said, "If I ever opened my mouth, my career, my family, everything would disappear." I believed her. He lowered his head, tears running down his cheeks. The prosecution concluded its questioning and yielded to defense counsel Martin Graves. He walked slowly to the podium, studying Larson closely. "Larson," Graves began. "In 1994, you were diagnosed with anxiety disorder and were taking sedatives, correct?" Larson replied, "Yes. And you also received therapy for emotional dependency on others." "Yes." Graves stepped closer. "So how can the court trust that your memory, nearly 30 years later, is accurate? Isn't it possible you reconstructed events the way investigators wanted them to be?" Larson looked up. "I wish that were true. But I remember every detail, every breath she took that night." Graves gave a thin smile. "You remember, yet there is no evidence you saw Mrs. Moore bury the body. You say she told you to cover him with snow. Couldn't that be something you imagined?" Larson answered, voice shaking but firm. "No. I saw her kneel down and push the snow over him with her hands. I can never unsee that image." Graves shifted direction. "Are you aware midazolam is a sedative, not a poison? Couldn't Wells have died from an accidental overdose?" Larson shook his head. "She told me to administer 4 times the medical dose." The prosecution objected as leading. Judge Keating struck the gavel for order. Graves pressed on Larson's mental history. "You were admitted to psychiatric care in 1998, correct?" "Yes. Because of nightmares. Because of her voice in my head. Couldn't that have been false memory syndrome?" "No. It was guilt." The air in the courtroom grew heavy. Lowell requested redirect. "Mr. Larson, in your prior statement you said Moore ordered you with the words, 'You owe me loyalty.' Why did that make you obey?" Larson answered softly, "She was the only person who ever made me feel I mattered. I lived on her approval. When she spoke, I had no choice." Several jurors bowed their heads to right. Lowell projected a scanned page from the therapy log. The line, "Jacob needs to learn responsibility. He owes me trust and silence," underlined in red. "Mr. Larson, did Moore ever say these exact words to you?" He stared at the screen, lips trembling, word for word. Graves rose to object, but Keating overruled. Lowell concluded, "No further questions, Your Honor." Larson was excused from the witness stand. As he passed the defendant's table, Moore turned her head and looked at him, not with anger, but with something almost like pity. He averted his eyes and hurried out. In the clerk's end-of-day summary, it was recorded. Witness Jacob Larson confirmed the entire sequence of events on the night of the homicide, describing in detail the directing role of Lillian Moore. Testimony is consistent with physical evidence and forensic findings. Defense focused on psychological factors and potential memory contamination. When the session ended that afternoon, wind from the Mississippi River blew cold through the courtroom windows, carrying fine snowflakes. On the jury table, the thick case file lay open to Moore's red-inked note. Jacob needs to learn responsibility. In the silence, Larson's testimony lingered like the echo of a blizzard that would never end. January 19, 2023, the trial moved to its third day, devoted entirely to testimony from forensic and psychological experts, the individuals whose scientific findings formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Prosecutor Henry Lowell opened by calling Dr. Elaine Murray, forensic toxicologist with the Minnesota State Crime Lab, who had personally analyzed the bone and soft tissue samples recovered from Dr. Aaron Wells's remains. She took the stand, was sworn in, and presented her report. Her voice was low and precise. We detected traces of midazolam in the bone marrow and remaining soft tissue at the left shoulder. Estimated concentration, based on remaining mass, was 4.7 times the standard sedative dose, sufficient to cause respiratory arrest within 10 minutes if administered intravenously. When asked about the drug's source, Murray confirmed, according to 1994 inventory records from St. Croix Hospital, only one person besides Dr. Wells had authorized access to that specific medication, Dr. Lillian Moore, then head of the therapy unit. The prosecution introduced the sealed midazolam vial, Exhibit 1, and asked her to authenticate it. Murray replied, "Yes, this is the vial my team and I examined. Clear fingerprints belonging to Moore run along the cap, matching official records on file. There are no prints from Wells on the cap, indicating Moore was the person who opened it." The prosecutor continued, "Can you therefore state that the victim died from a dose prepared and used outside legitimate medical purpose?" Murray answered, "Precisely. This was intentional administration, not accident." The courtroom was silent. Several jurors wrote notes. When defense counsel Graves cross-examined, he attempted to suggest possible cross-contamination, but Murray responded firmly. "We ran full DNA checks on all instruments. Everything was stored under dry cold conditions. There is no error. This dosage could not occur accidentally." Graves had no further questions. The next witness was Dr. Richard Hall, federal forensic DNA specialist. He presented comparison charts. We obtained Wells's DNA from the femur and molar teeth, and compared it to samples from the lab coat recovered at Lake Pepin. Result, 100% match. Additionally, the coat collar contains Jacob Larson's DNA on the right sleeve cuff and Moore's DNA on the rear collar, indicating close physical contact by both individuals shortly before death. Fabric structure around the collar also retained traces of benzyl alcohol, an excipient unique to that batch of midazolam. When the prosecution asked, "Can you conclude Wells was injected under restraint?" Hall nodded, "Yes. Bruising and needle mark on the medial right forearm show injection direction opposite natural self-administration. Clear evidence his arm was held." The prosecution thanked him and called the final witness. Dr. Catherine Lowe, clinical psychologist who had evaluated Lillian Moore during pretrial detention. As she took the stand, many eyes followed. The media had dubbed her the ice-cold criminal profiler. Her testimony was concise and sharp. Moore's behavior fits the pattern of high-level narcissistic personality disorder with manipulative traits. She didn't merely give orders, she constructed a psychological power structure in which Larson became an instrument. This is reflected in her therapy log language. Responsibility, silence, loyalty, terms of command, not treatment. When asked why Larson obeyed, Lowe replied, "Because Moore had rebuilt his self-worth around total submission to her. By the time she issued the order, he no longer perceived moral boundaries." Graves cross-examined, "Dr. Lowe, you were hired by the prosecution, correct?" "I was court-appointed, neutral. Can you state with certainty Moore deliberately manipulated Larson rather than simply exerting normal professional influence?" Therapy influence aims to increase patient autonomy. Moore did the opposite. She fostered dependence. That is control, not therapy. Graves probed, "Does that prove intent to murder?" Intent need not be proven through emotion. With Moore, The act itself is proof. She planned, coordinated, and justified removing the victim to preserve control. The answer left Graves silent. As Lowe stepped down, Judge Keating directed the clerk to read the expert summary into the record. Toxicology, DNA, and psychological experts confirmed direct involvement of Lillian Moore in the death of Dr. Aaron Wells. Lethal dose was intentional. Fingerprints, DNA, and behavioral records align with premeditated offense. When the court recessed at 5 p.m., the jury requested to review crime scene photos and DNA distribution charts again. The request was granted. In the fading light of the courtroom, photographs, forensic diagrams, and therapy log excerpts lay spread across the wooden tables like the final pieces of truth, all pointing to one woman, Lillian Moore, who sat straight-backed, never once lowering her head, as if every piece of evidence were merely a test she had prepared for 30 years earlier. January 20th, 2023, the trial entered closing arguments. The atmosphere was heavier and more tense than previous days. Judge Thomas Keating restated the rules, then allowed the defense to begin. Attorney Martin Graves rose, adjusted his glasses, and walked to the center of the room. His voice was measured, almost mournful. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the past 3 days you have heard the prosecution's narrative, a story painted as deliberate tragedy. But remember, the law demands proof beyond reasonable doubt. There is no document showing my client, Dr. Lillian Moore, gained financially or professionally from Aaron Wells's death. No will, no contract, no insurance policy. She was a physician, a researcher, not a cold-blooded killer. He paused, glanced at Moore, who remained composed, then continued, if she were guilty, why keep the photograph, the notebook, the medication, why not destroy them? The answer is simple, because they were part of her work, not part of a criminal plan. Every piece of evidence the prosecution offers rests on inference that therapy notes were commands, that professional traces were criminal traces. Ladies and gentlemen, a doctor writes in clinical language, not the diary of a murderer. He turned fully to the jury box. They speak of manipulation, of control. Yet psychology is the science of influence. Every therapist influences patients to change behavior. If Larson acted, it was the spontaneous act of an anxious, unstable man with a history of delusion. He alone admits injecting the drug, burying the body, yet asks you to believe he is innocent because he was manipulated. So who is manipulating whom here? The soft tapping of pens could be heard as reporters took notes. Graves lowered his voice. No motive, no direct eyewitness, only scattered fragments from the past reassembled to the prosecution's liking. I implore you to consider that sometimes the truth is simpler. A failed doctor, a disturbed patient, and an accident. He ended briefly, if you have doubt, you must acquit. Judge Keating nodded and recognized the prosecution for rebuttal. Henry Lowell stood without notes, holding only the Polaroid photograph. He walked to the center, voice firm. No financial motive. True. But not every murder is about money. Some kill to protect power, to preserve their self-image. That was Lillian Moore. He raised the photo. This is Aaron Wells, taken in her apartment, labeled last day. No one writes that unless they know what is coming. She kept it not because she forgot, but because she wanted to own the memory, own the story. That was her motive. Lowell switched to the timeline on screen. January 3rd. Moore writes, eliminate disruptive element. January 9th. Wells disappears. January 10th. Larson goes silent. And for 30 years, she lived comfortably with it. The plan was clear, orderly, complete. He faced the jury. She didn't need money. She needed obedience. When Wells resisted, she destroyed him. The only way she knew how: total control. The judge's gavel tapped lightly for quiet. Lowell closed in a low, steady tone. You are not allowed to pity a puppeteer. She did not kill in rage, but in absolute calm. And that makes this crime more terrifying. He returned to his table and set the photo down. The room was deathly still. Judge Keating delivered jury instructions, reminding them, Your duty is to determine whether the evidence proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Decide on evidence, not emotion." When he finished, the 12 jurors were led to the deliberation room. The wall clock read 4:12 p.m. Crowe sat in the back, eyes on the file in her lap. All 30 years of work now in the hands of 12 strangers. Outside in the corridor, the season's first snowflakes began to fall, blurring the windows of Ramsey County Courthouse, while inside, thick silence blanketed the courtroom, where the fate of 2 lives in a case long considered buried in 1994 was about to be decided. On the afternoon of January 21, 2023, after nearly 12 continuous hours of deliberation, the Ramsey County jury returned to the courtroom. The air was thick. Everyone fell silent as the 12 members filed in, faces tense but resolute. Judge Thomas Keating asked the customary question, "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" The foreperson, a middle-aged woman, stood and answered clearly, "Yes, Your Honor, we have." Keating directed her to read the verdict. She unfolded the paper and read slowly. "As to defendant Lillian Moore, on the charge of first-degree premeditated murder, we find the defendant guilty, but in light of the mitigating circumstance that she did not personally perform the act causing death act, the court reduces the charge to second-degree murder. As to defendant Jacob Larson, on the charge of accomplice to murder, we find the defendant guilty, with a recommendation for leniency, due to full cooperation with authorities." A murmur rose from the gallery, but was quickly silenced by the gavel. Keating read the formal sentence, pursuant to Minnesota Statute 609.19, defendant Lillian Moore is sentenced to 22 years imprisonment at Shakopee Correctional Facility, credit for time served. Defendant Jacob Larson is sentenced to 8 years imprisonment at Stillwater Prison, eligible for conditional release after 5 years due to cooperation and truthful testimony. As the final words were spoken, Moore sat motionless, hands clasped, staring straight ahead as if she heard nothing. No reaction, no expression. Larson, seated several rows away, bowed his head, shoulders shaking, fingers clenched around the plastic prison ID band. Prosecutor Henry Lowell exhaled quietly. Crowe, behind him, simply closed her notebook without adding another line. Judge Keating continued with the sentencing rationale in a grave tone. The court finds defendant Moore's actions were planned and calculated, intended to eliminate the victim in order to preserve power and control. Though she did not directly cause death with her own hand, she facilitated, supplied the means, and psychologically coerced another to carry it out. This was a premeditated crime concealed for nearly 30 years, revealed only by advances in forensic technology. A 22-year sentence is proportionate to the offense and its consequences. He turned to Larson. As to Jacob Larson, the court finds he acted under severe psychological manipulation by Moore, without personal motive, and later fully confessed, enabling resolution of the case. The reduced sentence acknowledges that cooperation and offers opportunity for rehabilitation. The courtroom remained silent. When asked if she wished to make a final statement, Moore rose, voice calm and unshaking. "I didn't kill anyone. I merely helped a man free himself from his own chaos. If that is a crime, I accept it." The words sent a chill through the room. Larson wept with his head down. Lowell glanced at the judge, then at Crowe, giving a small nod. Their job was done. Keating declared the proceedings concluded and struck the gavel 3 times. Officers moved in immediately. Larson was led out first, eyes red, walking heavily but without resistance. Moore rose last, looked briefly at her attorneys, then let her gaze pass over Crowe. For one brief moment the 2 women locked eyes, one who had lived in the shadow of her crime for 30 years, the other who had spent her career chasing the truth. Moore's stare was cold, unrepentant, almost saying, "You won, but I remain unchanged." Crowe offered no response, watching until Moore disappeared behind the metal door. Outside, the St. Paul sky was gray, light snow dusting the stone steps of Ramsey County Court. Reporters jostled for photos as the 2 prison vans pulled away, police lights cutting through the thick fog. In the clerk's final entry of the day, jury finds premeditated, planned murder. Court sentences Lillian Moore to 22 years, Jacob Larson to 8 years. Proceedings concluded at 1746. Crowe stepped into the corridor as cold air rushed in. She paused beneath the bronze plaque reading Justice Hall, Ramsey County Court, feeling both relief and emptiness. 30 years of investigation, the snows of 1994 had finally melted, revealing a simple, painful truth. Not every crime is born of hatred. Sometimes it is born only of the absolute need to control another human being, and the price for that, even if it takes 30 years, must still be paid. 2 days after the sentencing hearing, on the morning of January 23, 2023, news of the Minnesota cold case 1994 dominated front pages across the state. The Star-Tribune ran a bold headline, "Doctor convicted after 3 decades of concealment, the fall of a medical icon." The Pioneer Press published a 7-page editorial describing the case as a crack in the community's trust in medical ethics. Local television stations like WCCO and KARE 11 aired continuous special reports, retracing the 30-year investigation from the blizzard night of 1994 to the moment of sentencing in the Ramsey County courtroom. The broadcasts opened with footage of frozen Lake Pepin, where Dr. Aaron Wells' remains were discovered, interspersed with an interview with Lieutenant Megan Crowe. "We simply wanted to give a voice back to someone who had been silenced for far too long." The quote was widely cited and became a symbol of the perseverance of the Minnesota investigative forces. At St. Croix Hospital, where Wells and Moore once worked, a heavy silence enveloped the building for days. The board of directors held an emergency meeting and officially announced the establishment of the Aaron Wells Memorial Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting training in medical ethics and clinical psychotherapy. During a small ceremony held in the third-floor auditorium, hospital CEO and chief physician Dr. Samuel Greer spoke, "We cannot change the past, but we can learn not to repeat it." Wells was a dedicated man, and we want his memory to serve as a reminder. Outside the campus, hundreds of healthcare workers, medical interns, and local residents brought flowers to place in front of a bronze plaque bearing Wells' name. The plaque read, "For integrity and compassion in medicine, in memory of Dr. Aaron Wells." A framed photograph of him smiling gently was displayed, beneath which a handwritten note from former colleagues read, "We still remember you on every shift." At the same time, the Minnesota Department of Health issued a directive requiring all public and private healthcare facilities in the state to review their professional ethics procedures in the fields of psychotherapy and behavioral medicine. A special committee, consisting of physicians, psychologists, and lawyers, was formed, named the Ethics Reinforcement Program 2023, tasked with examining the oversight of doctor-patient relationships and preventing any form of dependency or intervention outside professional boundaries. Universities across the state, including the University of Minnesota and Mayo Clinic College of Medicine, immediately updated their curricula, adding modules on power disorders in therapeutic relationships and ethical boundaries in psychological intervention. The press called this the Wells Effect, a rare wave of self-examination and reform in modern medicine. Many professional organizations, including the American Psychological Association, sent letters of condolence and pledged to collaborate on retraining members in ethical standards. In Winona, the small town where the story began, residents still spoke of the case as a scar on the community. A coffee shop near the town center hung a photograph of Lake Pepin with a small caption underneath, "Where the truth was found." Many who once knew Moore still refused to believe she was capable of the crime, but most acknowledged that the evidence presented in court was indisputable. During a local radio talk show, veteran journalist Dana Keller said, "This case forces us to re-examine trust, not only in the medical profession, but in the very concept of absolute trust between human beings." At the same time, forensic experts in the region noticed a sudden surge in requests to reopen cold cases, as though the Wells case had rekindled the will to pursue long-forgotten justice. Lieutenant Megan Crowe received hundreds of thank you letters from across the state, including some from families whose loved ones had been missing for years. In a brief television interview, when asked what kept her persistent for 3 decades, Crowe simply said, "Because cases like this are never truly closed. They just wait for someone patient enough to listen." At St. Croix Hospital, the memorial service ended with a somber cello recording. As the music played, attendees stood in silence, many in tears. On the table lay a neatly folded white lab coat embroidered with the name A. Wells, topped with an artificial snowflower, a symbol of that winter. Outside, snow began to fall again over Minnesota, each flake drifting slowly and lightly onto the stone benches in the courtyard. In the dim afternoon light, the words on the memorial plaque glimmered beneath a thin layer of ice, as if to remind everyone of an indelible truth. Justice, though late, still has the power to awaken an entire community. In February 2024, exactly 1 year after the sentence was handed down, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension issued an internal notice, case file #940217. Wells, Aaron. All judicial procedures completed, officially closed. The document was signed by the Director of the Department of Justice and sent to the Cold Case Unit, the St. Paul Forensic Services Division, and the Ramsey County Prosecutor's Office. At the St. Paul headquarters, Lieutenant Megan Crowe was present to oversee the final transfer of evidence. Sealed boxes, sequentially numbered, contained all documents, physical evidence, photographs, audio recordings, and backed-up digital copies stored in the state's digital archive system. Box 1, Exhibit 0104, the vial of midazolam, the brown leather therapy notebook, Polaroid photographs, and the hand-drawn map by Moore. Box 2, Exhibit 0508, DNA analysis reports, confrontation transcripts, and recovered audio files. Everything was sealed with red wax and labeled Archive, St. Paul Evidence Vault. Crowe checked every signature and security seal before signing the final confirmation next to the printed line, "Custody transferred. Final disposition." After nearly 30 years, the case that had haunted Minnesota investigators was officially moved to storage. In the cold storage room, technicians slid the metal rack into slot 3C, where hundreds of old cases were kept. Yellow light illuminated the thin layer of dust, reflecting the case number 94, NI0217, engraved on the lid. A designation that closed a decade-long pursuit. Simultaneously, the Cold Case Unit's administrative department completed the final summary report for the Department of Justice. The 216-page document detailed the entire reinvestigation process, from reopening the file in June 2022 through evidence examination, audio restoration, behavioral analysis, prosecution phases, and sentencing. In the introduction, Crowe wrote, "The Wells case demonstrates the power of forensic technology when combined with human perseverance." It was not merely an investigation, it was the restoration of justice for the past. The final section included recommendations to improve cold case storage procedures, such as full digitization of evidence and creation of federal data links to prevent long-term loss. The report also proposed adding a module on detection of manipulative behavior to the Minnesota Police Academy curriculum, based on what the Moore-Larson case revealed. On February 14th, a small ceremony was held at the Cold Case Unit to mark the case's closure. There were no media cameras, only a few dozen investigators and technicians who had worked on the case. On the screen in the middle of the room appeared the words, "Case #940217, closed February 2024. Crowe was invited to speak briefly. She said, "We cannot erase the past, but we can finish writing the rest of it with the truth." The room fell silent for a few seconds, then light applause followed. Afterward, she walked down the archive corridor and stopped at shelf 3C74, where the Wells evidence boxes had just been placed. Beside them were hundreds of old files, names faded with time. She touched the cold red wax seal, as if touching time itself. At the end of the row, a new metal sign read, "Cold Case Archive, St. Paul Justice Facility." Under the dim lights, the letters reflected onto the concrete floor, blending into the perfect silence of the soundless room. Outside, winter snow fell gently over the city of St. Paul. Street lights reflected off the Mississippi River, creating a long, faint ribbon of light that seemed to carry the memories of 1994. In her small second-floor office, Crowe sat by the window watching the snow. Beside her, the file now stamped "Closed." She drew a final line in her notebook, writing in neat, resolute handwriting, "Minnesota 1994, completed. Wells has his name back, and justice has its meaning restored." She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and stepped out of the room. The cold storage door shut behind her, the hallway lights gradually fading. In the quiet space, only the steady hum of the cooling system remained, safeguarding the evidence of the past, where 3 decades of snow had now become the final seal, marking a case that had completed its full journey from disappearance, investigation, trial, to justice. Forever closing file #940217 in Minnesota judicial history. The story above is not merely a criminal case solved after 3 decades. It is also a mirror reflecting many issues that remain relevant in American society today, particularly trust, professional ethics, and individual responsibility within a larger system. In the story, Dr. Lillian Moore exploited her position and reputation in the medical field to manipulate Jacob Larson, turning him into a tool for her crime. She did not act for money, but out of a desire for control, an extreme manifestation of power and ego. Though her actions took place in 1994, they echo problems the United States still faces today: the abuse of power in professional environments, especially in fields that demand absolute trust, such as healthcare, education, and psychotherapy. From this case, the deepest lesson is the value of transparency and ethical oversight in every profession. The American medical system, shocked by the case, responded by reaffirming professional standards and establishing independent ethics committees, something every modern organization should learn from. Additionally, Jacob Larson's case serves as a reminder of the importance of personal strength in recognizing and escaping the influence of others. In today's society, where soft power and psychological influence are everywhere, from social media to the workplace, each person must retain the ability to self-reflect, dare to question authority and expertise. Justice in this story arrived late, but truth ultimately prevailed, reminding us that in the United States, a society that respects the rule of law, no amount of power is great enough to forever conceal what is unethical and inhumane. Thank you for following the journey to solve the Minnesota 1994 case, where justice finally triumphed after 30 years buried beneath the snow. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring more true stories of crime, truth, and the human lessons behind every cold case file.